Mic check for the recording and the stream.
Doesn't mind, I think I'll just kick this meeting off until the mayor gets here. And so it's welcome everybody. It's May 11, Tuesday night, and we're having a special meeting to start things off. So City Clerk, if you wouldn't mind reading our special meeting announcement, please.
Notice is hereby given that a special meeting of the Laramie City Council will be held Tuesday, May 11th, 2021 at 6:00 p.m. via Zoom webinar, ID number 811-9358-5176, passcode 552932 from City Hall Council Chambers, 406 Ivinson Avenue, Laramie, Wyoming, for the following purpose. Number 1, consideration of amendments to the fiscal year 2022 recommended capital plan. And number 2, to adjourn.
Okay, great, thank you. Could you do roll call, please?
Cumbie.
Here.
Gabriel.
Here.
Harrington.
Here.
O'Doherty.
Here.
Schuster.
Sorry, here. Forgot the mic.
Zelder.
Here.
Somerville.
Here.
Pierce.
Here.
Weaver. Absent. That's 8 present and 1 absent, Your Honor.
Great, thank you. According to the notes here for our recommended capital plan, no amendments were provided. So Malia, Ms. Brown, do you want to start us out here?
Yes, Vice Mayor, I just wanted to say that we had 2 capital work sessions and we provided a form to all the council members to propose any amendments or changes to the capital budget. At this time, we have not received any amendments for this special meeting, and at this point we don't have any changes recommended.
Okay, So I guess if anybody has an amendment at this point, could you please, I guess, just raise your hand and confirm that that you have an amendment for discussion? Okay, so not hearing or seeing anybody, and we're not actually voting on the capital budget this evening, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I guess without further ado, I just would entertain a motion to, Counselor Schuster, sorry.
I make a motion that we adjourn from this and go to our work session.
Second.
Thank you. Motion moved by Counselor Schuster, seconded by Counselor Harrington. Thank you. And I think we better do a roll call vote on this.
Cumby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Stalder,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver, absent. That's 8 yeses and 0 noes and 1 absent, Your Honor.
Great, thanks. Let's just go ahead and move right into our work session. Do we have any public comments on non-agenda items?
I have none tonight, Madam Mayor.
Okay, and I don't see any hands raised in our attendee list. So I guess let's just go ahead and move to our operating budget work session. And I'm guessing, all right, City Manager Janine Jordan's going to kick us off, correct? Janine, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Got it. There you go. Good evening, Council. Sorry for the mute incident. I always think we're going to move past that, or I'm going to move past that, but it's good to be here tonight. We're excited to talk to you about our operating and maintenance budget for the upcoming fiscal year starting July 1st. As you know, we just presented in April the capital, construction, and major equipment budget for your review and modification, and then tonight we'll start looking at our operations and maintenance budgets. So with that, Council, the clerk, I believe, is going to share screen with you throughout this meeting to keep us all literally on the same page. We've pre-distributed the recommended 2021-22 budget for you, and you should have that publication in your email inboxes. It is also, of course, on the city website under the Department City Manager tab, or the public could search in the upper right-hand screen on the web page for the budget to find that document if they'd like to review it as well. Mayor or Vice Mayor Pierce, we've worked up a schedule to get us through the 2 work sessions we have scheduled this week for tonight and, of course, tomorrow. And then we will have a 3rd work session on the schedule as what we'll call overflow for Wednesday, for the following Wednesday after this week. So with that, Council, I think where I'd like to start this evening is on page 5 of the recommended O&M budget, and that is the city manager's message. Excuse me, it's page 4. Thank you, Clerk. Okay, so the clerk's got us on share screen. As part of the budget publication each year, I will provide to the Council a cover letter, transmittal letter, transmitting the recommended budget to you and highlighting particular aspects of the budget that are notable this year. So I'll start out by letting you know that the budget was prepared in accordance with the statute, and it is a structurally balanced budget for you to consider this year, as it is, frankly, every year. I want to hit a couple of high points from the manager's message here. You'll recall, of course, last year that we did deviate a little bit from our standard biennial budget process, and of course, the reason for that was the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year, we adopted a one-year budget, but of course, did publish our 6-year capital construction program. You looked at that last month. We also took a pretty measured approach to our operating and maintenance budgets as well. You've had a number of budget amendments throughout the year because when we adopted the operating budget last year, we did hold back certain elements of the budget, notably some modifications to staff salary and other staffing issues. The reason we held those funds back and didn't ask the council to appropriate those sort of formally when you adopt the budget last June was because we weren't certain what our revenue picture would look like, and we wanted to take a very careful and measured approach to the fiscal year and release those funds in increments throughout the year versus just in a mass appropriation in June as we typically do. We are going to cover all of your operating and maintenance budgets in some pretty quick overview tonight. We're also going to take a little bit of a deep dive into the Recreation Center as we conclude tonight's discussion. And as I said in the cover letter here in the city manager's message, the Recreation Center really has been heavily impacted by the pandemic conditions that we've seen over the last year and a few months. We really have exceptionally low or poor revenue receipts this year, and that was not unexpected. We knew that that would happen with the pandemic conditions and the closures that were mandated by the state. And staff have been working pretty diligently to try to figure out how we regroup and we pivot, right? That's one of our code words from 2020 is everybody learning how to pivot in light of changing conditions. So how we will pivot and how we will move forward to address the current situation, which really is that we're going to make a significant contribution out of general revenue this year to the Recreation Center to offset those low revenue receipts that we saw out there. So Jody Guerin, our Recreation Manager, and Todd Fieser, your Assistant City Manager, are going to talk to you at the last section of this evening's presentation a little bit more about that. So with that said, let me look at my schedule here. We have a number of department heads and other staff with us tonight. I'd like for them to have the opportunity to speak to you directly, Council, on their particular portions of the budget. So keep that in mind. We'll go back and forth this evening. Before we get into those discussions, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about legislative impacts in a really general way that we are planning for this year coming out of the 2020 legislative session. And as you all know, the legislature also had an unusual year, like we all did, with meeting in a sort of different format and on a different schedule than is typical. In addition, they're going to be conducting some additional meetings this month, and then I understand possibly a special session as well later this summer. I think that's still up in the air. So we typically at this time of year, we're done with legislation, and we're able to understand what the outcomes of the legislative session were and then implement those accordingly for our municipality. This year it looks like we're going to have multiple rounds potentially of legislation to react to. So I wanted to touch on a couple of things that are coming out of this first and the more typical session of the Wyoming legislature that are issues that we're implementing, and in particular, because this is a budget session, I want to focus on things that may constitute some sort of unfunded mandate or require additional staff time or additional cost to implement in some form or fashion. So I want to touch on first House Bill 14. This bill provides some requirements and procedures for rights-of-way. We, at the staff level, are reviewing these things. We do think that this bill is going to increase our costs specific to administering permits and field construction, and for administering those permits. We're still in the, I guess I would say, researching phase of this, but there's a potential for some additional funding, or more importantly, staff time at this point in time as we implement that and figure out what the actual drain on staff resources will look like, or increased work on staff resources. We also had, of course, House Bill 198, which was really specific to Laramie, although it did affect any municipality wherein the University of Wyoming has property. This bill allowed for the University of Wyoming to run water systems, basically, or to drill wells and run non-potable water systems for irrigation. At this point in time, our chief operating officer and our rate consultant are working on a number of rate analysis pieces that we had scheduled for this year, but we have added some additional scope of work for this group so that they could try to wrap their head around what this could mean for the city and for our revenue requirement overall. Right now, the chief operating officer is telling me that House Bill 198, with early information, looks like it'll probably impact the overall revenue requirement for the water fund somewhere between 3 and 6%. So increase the need there potentially 3 to 6%. Although beyond giving you that broad number, we can't really break that down right now in detail, but expect to bring you back that detail probably late summer or in the fall. And Malia, if there's anything you'd like to add here, please do, or counsel, if you have questions, please jump in at any time. I hear none, so I'll just keep moving, Vice Mayor, if that's all right.
Yeah, I just want to let the council know that I'm only able to see 6 squares and maybe a little not so fast on scrolling through people to see if they have their hand raised. So if folks just want to jump in there, that'd be fine by me, and we'll let Janine kind of run the show if that's okay. So thanks.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. I appreciate that. And Council, as you know, on these Zoom meetings, I'm looking at like 2 different screens, and I'm not always looking for folks out there who might raise their hands. So if a verbal, hand raising, so to speak, is in order, I'm certainly okay with that. So with no questions on House Bill 198, we will get more information back to you later this year. I also want to point out House Bill 158, which was passed by the legislature and now is being enrolled and codified. This has to do with local land use planning. I will tell you right now, as staff have reviewed this bill, what it says is effectively that the adoption of a comprehensive plan is clearly a vision and guiding document, and that land use regulations should be done through zoning and not rely at all on comprehensive plan outlines. This is a little bit of a departure from how planning, in my opinion, not the planning manager, Derek can correct me, but it's a departure and maybe a turning on its head of traditional planning, which allows for a governing body to adopt a comprehensive plan as a vision document and then to zone accordingly when things are consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. At this point, as we've reviewed House Bill 158, I have to say I think there's a great deal of uncertainty among staff right now as to how we will implement this bill and what it even means, frankly. The planning managers provided to me, along with the assistant city manager, 2 kind of interpretations of this bill, but I think that in the end of the day, the way that we will probably understand what this piece of legislation means for how we administer these matters at a municipal level, I think we're going to find out eventually how to do that, likely through legislation, maybe a court interpreting this piece of law. I would offer for the assistant city manager or for the planning manager to weigh in if they'd like to, but I bring this to your attention just because I do think there's a real potential for House Bill 158 to constitute sort of an unfunded mandate and drive costs or drive additional needs for staffing as we learn and understand more what it really means and how we're really going to need to change our practices to honor the bill. Okay, I also want to point out for you, so those are 2 what I would, I need to point out a third significant bill that I think will drive costs for the city. And I would say this bill is similar to the one I just discussed. This is Senate File 152, similar to House Bill 158, in that I think we're still trying to wrap our head around what this actually means for the city. But this bill has to do with the connection of utility services, and it prohibits cities and towns from denying a connection effectively. We think this means that the city cannot adopt any regulations that will prohibit the connection to a municipal service, to our water or our sewer or our wastewater systems. That's pretty complicated, as you know. Typically, cities use connection to city services to drive annexation. And this bill, we think, is going to cause some really major issues for planning and particularly for growth planning and growth management. I'll give you an example that was shared with me by the planning manager. What do we do if a bottling plant wanted to set up, just right over the city limits in the county? This bill appears to oblige the city to provide water service or any other service to that non-tax paying entity sitting outside of the city limits, and would require us to serve them, even if it meant that maybe, we didn't have sufficient quantity of water to continue to operate other aspects or parts or the entirety of our water system. So this is a very concerning bill. It was pushed back on very hard by cities and towns, but unfortunately did pass, and I understand was driven by a developer in the Teton County area who had yet to even be denied service, but wanted to preempt that and make sure that they would be provided service even if the city declined. So unfortunately, all cities will deal with that going forward. And I can't tell you what the cost is going to be, but it could be significant for the continuity and sustainability of our water and sewer and wastewater systems. Any questions on that one? No? Looks good. Okay. All right, so those are the three major bills that I wanted to point out that have budgetary impacts. We'll be implementing those. Because of the lateness of the legislative session concluding this year, we really didn't have a chance to weave these issues into the budget recommendation. I feel comfortable with that because we do anticipate coming back with the council in the summer for some kind of a special meeting to consider the Recovery Act funding, and at that time I think we will have had sufficient time to understand at least a little bit more fully how these Wyoming State Legislature issues will affect us, and we can talk about additional funding if needed at that time. So with that...
Hey, Janine, this is Pat. Could I ask you a question?
Hi, Pat. Yes, absolutely.
I was just curious how you felt WHAM represented the city interest in these bills that you've talked about in the past legislative session. Did they do an adequate job in your mind? Because some of the issues that you have brought up are really concerning, and they seem to be like there's nobody listening to the city concerns. I just wondered about this, the WHAM representation to the state legislature this session. Just your opinion on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss that just a bit. I will say, with respect to, for instance, House Bill 158, Councilor Gabriel and members of council, WHAM was successful in lobbying for some modifications to this bill that certainly made the bill that passed maybe less challenging for cities than it would have been if it passed as introduced. But even the improvements that they were successful in lobbying for are still concerning. So in that regard, I think, WHAM was able to improve some bills and make them maybe less challenging. But I will say, the legislature, these attacks on local control and city and county control have been pervasive for many, many years, going back probably 5 or 6 years. And they just seem to be becoming more and more intense. So what that means for the County Commissioners Association or for the Municipal Association, I don't know. But we did see, in my opinion, a pretty unprecedented number of bills that were considered in this session that really attack local control and the rights of city councils and county commissions to make decisions. And it's disturbing. I just don't know what to say about it. I can say WHAM fought the good fight. Could they have been more effective? It's hard to say. And overall, most of the bills that WHAM opposed did, in fact, either get some kind of amendment or not pass or not get introduced. And there's a summary I can share with you all if you'd like me to, that WHAM provides. And so, of course, we give that the scrutiny that it needs coming from, the report card from the folks who are reporting their own grades, right?
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And Vice Mayor, if I could add real fast, if that's all right. Councilor Gabriel, WHAM did also testify on in support of the city of Laramie in opposing House Bill 198, as well, the University Wells. Despite that being very arguably narrowly focused on Laramie, they were willing to testify alongside us on that as well.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, Council? And we'll be moving to page 20 to kind of cover some of our financial position and revenue outlook. So while the clerk moves us to those pages and everyone gets there, if you have any questions, I'm happy to address them. Okay, it looks like not. So, Council, I'll say in the intervening pages between the page we're on and page 20, there's some general breakdown of fund accounting. I know most of you are familiar with that, so I didn't intend to cover it in detail. It also breaks down each of our funds by type and shows what functions and what departments and divisions of our city those funds pay for, respectively. And then also talks a bit about the governance structure and the City Council's adopted goals for this period. And so that is on pages up to page 19. And then on page 20, I'm going to turn it over, actually page 21, I'm going to turn it over to our Deputy Director for Administrative Services and our COO to just give you a quick overview of our financial position and then secondarily our revenue outlook for the general fund.
Good evening, Honorable Vice Mayor, City Councilors. I'll be leading off this evening, reviewing financial position with you, and then I will be passing the torch to Malia, the Chief Operating Officer, who will review revenue with you for the general fund. And so that's the structure of this presentation. As you know, the general fund is the primary fund of governments, and this fund is used to account for anything that shouldn't be accounted for elsewhere. And so what you find in the general fund is most of the city's governmental services. And when I say that, I mean fire and police and streets and other public works organization entities and parks and recreation and administration. So there's a lot that's accounted for in the general fund. For fiscal year 22, the general fund is just about half of the recommended budget for governmental funds. Now, when we talk about general fund financial position, it's a little bit unique. And it's unique because revenue in the general fund is largely comprised of taxes and other intergovernmental revenue sources over which the city doesn't have direct control. And when we say direct control, we mean, does the city have the ability to go increase or even decrease the amount of revenue that we get from certain things? And in the general fund, that isn't the case. We can't just go change, for example, the amount of sales tax distributed to us. That would require legislative action. And so we have a constraint with revenue that we don't have in a lot of our other city funds. And to top that off, we are also funding many of our governmental services in the general fund. And so when we think about budgeting for the general fund in particular, but really for all city funds, what we are looking for is sustainability. And sustainability in budgeting means structural balance. Structural balance refers to the ability of a fund's ongoing revenue sources to support its ongoing operating costs. And so we would like to relegate the funding of one-time things like capital expenditures to be funded by one-time revenue sources, like for the city, the direct distribution in the general fund. We would consider that to be a non-reliable revenue source at this point, or grants or things of that nature. And so in the general fund, we've put so much work in coordination with the city manager and the budget team to figure out how to make this budget sustainable. And I think you can really see that in the general fund's financial position. What I'd like to focus on first are some significant improvements in the general fund revenue. And so, as you know, in November of 2018, voters approved the fifth penny general purpose optional tax for another 4-year term. That is one of our major funding sources for taxes in the general fund, and that really helps stabilize operations. In addition, that same year, voters approved a specific purpose tax that entirely benefits governmental operations. And so while that specific purpose tax is not accounted for in the general fund, it actually is supporting capital investment in general fund operations like streets, stormwater, parks, trails, and facilities. If we contrast that with the 2010 tax, only 24% of that specific purpose tax actually went to governmental operations, because in 2010, the city's most pressing need was for utility meaning wastewater and water and solid waste infrastructure investment, because we were just starting our rate planning initiatives and we wanted to mitigate the impact to the ratepayers. And so this new SPT tax that is devoted, if you will, to governmental operations really does help us catch on some deferred maintenance and greatly benefits the general fund. Additionally, what has been amazing for the city of Laramie was the legislation passed in 2019 that expanded the taxation of online sales. I pulled some information just prior to this meeting. Fiscal year 20 was the first year we saw results from that increase in taxability. And in the online and mail order sales sector for Albany County, last year collections were up 145% in that category. To date this year, meaning through March 2021, we're always kind of a month behind in finance, we were up another 39.4%. And so this has been just amazing for Albany County. And especially with the timing hitting right as the pandemic hit last year in fiscal year 2020, really helped us out. City Clerk, if you would be so kind as to move us on to page 22. I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the graph in the first column of page 22. It says operating revenue versus expenditures. And this is kind of what I'm talking about when I say structural balance. So what I'd like you to notice, the kind of grayish blue line is operating expenditures and the straight up gray line is operating revenue. And what you see is until 2017, operating expenditures actually exceeded operating revenue. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. What that means, our budget was still in balance as required by statute. But what it means is we were relying on the direct distribution or other revenue sources to actually fund some of that differential. Well, if you look, starting in 2017, you don't see that anymore. You see that really tight hug. And then from that, you also see operating revenue starting to slightly exceed operating expenditures. Now, this graph means a lot to me. It's my favorite graph in the entire budget book. And it means a lot to me because I know how much work that the city manager and the leadership team and the budget team did in order to achieve that tight little hug in fiscal year 2017 and 18 for that biennium. We were receiving that if you remember, from a legislation standpoint, our direct distribution was cut, consensus funding went away. It was a bad year at the legislature. Plus, we realized we really needed to address the structural balance issue. And so we were able to do this with operating reductions that the city manager recommended and the council approved. Staffing reductions were achieved through attrition, so no one lost their job by surprise. And so we did this in a really humane way, and it's had some pretty fantastic results for us. At the same time, the city manager also recommended a temporary freeze on new capital spending. What that did was it allowed us to build a capital reserve in the general fund. Now, at first, we were holding this reserve as insurance in case voters didn't approve the 5th and 6th cent tax, because we would have had to still have money for capital investment, right? But they did. And so when that tax was approved, the city manager removed that freeze on new spending, and we have this additional reserve that was built up for more capital investment. And I think you can see, especially some of our longer term counselors, the amount of money that we've been able to recommend for capital investment in the general fund and governmental operations is a lot for this reason. It's the result of a fair amount of planning that's gone on in the past 5 years, and I think it's worth bragging about a little bit. So that's what I'm doing tonight. And so that's kind of where the story, at least for the past 5 years, of why we are where we are. Now let's talk about last year in particular. I think what we all know is none of us want to repeat 2020. Starting in March, the city manager issued a freeze on non-essential spending. That did also include a hard freeze for hiring open positions that were not deemed essential. And so freeze across the board, and then we watch and we rate, right? Everyone was watching and waiting to see what happened. And we were watching revenue in particular, and we wondered what's going to be the case, right? We have online sales that are now taxable, but then we have certain sectors that are tanking, like poor accommodation and food services. And actually, because of the timing of this of the expanded taxation of online sales, the city of Laramie ended up $500,000 up in sales tax for fiscal year 2020. And so for us, the pandemic probably couldn't have happened at a better time. And it was much better than we expected. Overall revenue last year in the general fund was up $200,000. As I said, the city manager froze spending in the last quarter of the fiscal year. Our largest potential ongoing cost increase were some performance-based adjustments for staff members, 1%, 2%, or 3%. For most employees, with 2.5% for the collective bargaining agreement. But even that, we had attrition and our actuals didn't increase overall. And so we had a growth in fund balance for 2020 of $1.4 million. Most of that, because of the freeze, was actually due to not spending in operating. Now in 2021, it's been another wild ride, if you will. It's been eventful. We were wildly successful in our CARES Act applications with the State Loan and Investment Board. The general fund benefited from that to the tune of about $2.56 million. City Clerk, if you will, please move us to page 23. Thank you very much. And this year, sales and use tax has continued. Our revenue has continued to rise. As of March, we were up about $2.4 million, which is a 27.8% increase. Now, I'd caution you that about half of this is actually from wind farm development. And so about $1 million is what we're currently estimating. And so it's not all ongoing, but even without that, it is still more than any of us could have ever hoped for, to be honest, especially after getting used to the general fund being scarce, if you will. And so these two bright spots in particular have been really helpful to the city. I'll be frank that revenue from fines and forfeitures and parks and recreation user fees and sources like that are still not looking great, right? We wouldn't expect them to. 2021 in particular will be the worst year for those revenue sources because the most of the year has been impacted by the pandemic. But we are expecting that into 2022, we will start to see that recovery and be more or less back to whatever normal was by the end of next fiscal year. We are planning to end fiscal year 2021 in structural balance with the only major ongoing cost increases being performance-based adjustments that were awarded to most employees with the exclusion of the leadership team this year, as well as a 2.5% step increase to the collective bargaining agreement. So 2021 will end better than we expected. In terms of our overall fund balance, which you see a graph of in the top of page 23, which is on your screen, you're going to see more of the same, what I've been talking about. You see it more or less holding stable from 2011 to 2016 with a sharp increase in 17 and 18. That's that capital reserve that I was referring to earlier, and less steep climbs after the fact. We have a policy that requires us to keep an amount of reserve, an unassigned fund balance equal to 3 to 6 months of our budget. And we did comply with that policy for fiscal year 2020 with 5.5 months on hand. And City Clerk, if you will, for me, could you move to page 24? And the table at the top of page 24 illustrates to you that our budget is balanced, as the city manager indicated earlier, that our forecasted revenue and our available reserves do not exceed the recommended expenditures for fiscal year 2022. And at this time, I will pass it off to Chief Operating Officer Brown.
Good evening, Council. I just wanted to, it's giving me feedback here, hopefully. Okay. I just wanted to go into the actual general revenues that are part of the general fund and maybe explain some of the items that are making up our general revenue. First of all, most of our revenues, around 75%, in 2020 it was 77%, is made up of taxes and intergovernmental revenues. And some of these taxes, of course, if you go to the 24 page and you look at the graph, you'll see that a lot of these revenues, most of it is sales and use tax from the 4th and 5th penny, which is around 48%. The direct distribution keeps going down, and you'll see it on many charts, and right now it's 17%. And we have some impact assistance, severance and taxes around 8%, and other intergovernmental would be property, auto tax. We have the IMH agreements that we get reimbursed for our EMS. We have public safety grants, those sort of things that are intergovernmental. So I'm going to go into some of the description. If you go to page 25, Nancy. I want you to see that the intergovernmental trends and the tax trends is that, just as Jennifer said, our sales tax is going up, and that's good. It's been going up because of the sales tax online. And of course, in 21, we're going to see a big increase from one-time sales tax. And if you look at the direct distribution, it's continuing to go down, and I feel that trend is happening. And I wanted to take some time to explain our mineral and severance taxes. They're we get a cap on them. And back in 2002, they were uncapped. But right now we get about 1.1 million in severance tax each year. And we get about 786,000, 90,000 in mineral taxes. And that's been the same for, since 2002. And before 2002, we didn't have direct distribution. There was no cap on the tax, and we benefited from those severance taxes. And, just for history with new counselors on board, the direct distribution was to replace some of that cap that was put in 2002. And that cap pretty much allowed for them to get, they now have a bucket of money that they're going to give us, but it's just a bucket of money based on a formula. And this formula keeps changing, or the amount of money in total for counties and cities continue to be cut. And so it's money that you can't rely on. We shouldn't be doing maybe one-time expenditures more than, operations. And so, as we go into the direct distribution, they were trying to cut it this session up to 10%. It kind of ran out of time, and that bill didn't happen. However, with the new legislation, maybe in the summer or even in next year, I'm projecting that we are still going to project a cut, because I believe we will get a cut. And so when you look at that number, and also the formula changes, and it's very difficult to explain, but it's based on how much sales tax you get and how much property tax you get. And if you have big swings in sales tax, you get more, you get more money going in the formula. So of course, our sales tax has been going up. So I feel that we're going to have a big swing, even if they don't have a cut. So this year in 22, I'm projecting 3.2 million versus the 4.1 we had. And I just wanted to explain the background of that whole direct distribution and what it means. But basically it's 17% and going down. And why we're doing well is probably our sales tax is helping us remain stable. Also, I'll talk about the 5th cent. The 4th cent, we get, 31% of the 4 pennies, and 1% is administrative fee. So the state collects most of that 4 cent. The 5th penny comes all to us except for a 1% fee. And we, do elections on the 1 penny, which is could be up for renewal, I think, in 22, that we have to think about renewing the penny. One of the things that the legislature did this year on the 5th penny is they did allow for people to vote on the penny off general election. So that means we can do it on other years besides the general election year, which is flexibility for, if we actually wanted to go for the 7th penny on a year that wasn't general. So I wanted to mention that. Some of the things that on our intergovernmental that I wanted to talk about, besides the 5th and 6th penny, is that, just history also with some of the council members. We used to have our food tax taxed, and now I think it ended in 06, and they had some backfill for a few years. But, it's taken us 10 years to catch up with the food tax, and I think we're finally caught up to where we were. And that has had a long-term effect on the city, because I believe if we had food tax all these years, we would be doing a whole lot better than what we've done. So I just wanted to give some history to the new council members, and if they have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If you go to page 26, I wanted to show you this chart, and this is just the fourth penny. It doesn't include the fifth penny. And it shows the amount, the way that the penny works is that, it's only based on sales tax in your area that you collected. And because of that, you have big swings like severance and tax in the mining areas of the counties, and you have us where we have, University of Wyoming that is tax exempt. And so you have a big swing in the per capita. And if you look at that, Albany County, we're on the low end. We collect about 209,000 per capita versus, Converse on the big end of 1,688 per capita. So we're trying to provide services at a low income, and how we do that is we use our fifth penny for a lot of the operations, and I think a lot of other cities use it a lot for projects and not necessarily operations, but we couldn't survive without the fifth penny. It's pretty important. And we also, give our partners and community partners money from that fifth penny also. So I wanted to show that. If you go to page, I think the other things that I was going to talk about, the property tax, we have a lot of things that really don't raise except, the property tax is pretty much, we have 8 mills, we have assessed 8 mills, and the only increases in property tax that happen is the valuation of property. So, the assessor goes and evaluates, we will get a little more money each year, but it's not something that just grows a whole lot. Auto is the same thing. You don't necessarily know. Our franchise fees, we of course have franchise taxes going on, but the rates have really remained steady. We're doing 2.25% on gas. We haven't raised that, and I think that council's preference is not based on the environment that we're in at this point. So you go to page 28, 29. Once again, I think we've showed some of the direct distribution. Just shows a chart on page 29 once again of where it's going down, and I believe it will continue to go down. And we do have our governmental. We said in 2020 it was 77% the taxes and sales tax, different taxes, and our intergovernmental collections on this general fund was mainly that. The rest of this, the money that's coming from our general fund, is really other services that we do control. We have some charges for services that we do for recreation. We have mosquito control going in there. We have things like park and rec fees. We have code administration fees and planning fees that go in that we do have some control over. So, it's not that much control. So I just want to say, when you're trying to find revenue or projects that you want to fund, it's hard to do. And I know other cities, it's easier for council members, but it's hard to come up with money in the general fund. So that's my, other things that we're working on, I think, that we're looking at, or we could have extra money coming in. Of course, the seventh penny is also something we have not looked at. If there's, a time where our direct distribution got totally cut, that would probably be something we want to do. Also, we're looking, I'm looking at storm drainage. We're just going to bring something to you because we can do a storm drainage now and help bring an enterprise fund. We're just looking at kind of an overview of what that would mean, and we'll probably bring a work session to council on that. We're not necessarily going to start with enterprise fund, but we'll bring you all the facts of that. We do have that in progress. So those are some of the things that we can do on the general fund. We do have loans and stuff that we have. But that's pretty much what's going on in the general fund. If you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to discuss anything.
I have a question. This is Erin.
Uh-huh.
Does the property tax, is that, you said it only increases when the value of property goes up, but also we're losing taxable property as the university grows. Is that kind of balancing out the increases?
Yeah, I have not seen it go down, so I don't know if they've had that much impact. It's pretty much is growing around 100,000 to, a year just on value, but it's a slow growth.
All right, thank you.
I have a question about that property tax as well. The city receives only a portion of those property taxes that are assessed at the county level. And it's what percentage of that revenue intake is distributed to the city?
Yeah, it's kind of a complicated formula. I'd have to go look at it because it's different assessments for different types of property. So when you go look at I'll go look at the property tax. So depending on if you're residential or commercial, I'm trying to find the page where the property tax is on. Okay, if you go to page 27. So we're getting a full 8 mills, which is a percent of what they're charging, and other people are getting different mills too. So I'd have to go look at the sheet again, but the gross products are taxed like 100% of property for minerals and mines, and then industrial purchases are 11%, and then real estate is 9.5%. So then different people get different mills out of those percents, and we're only going to get certain amount of mills, but other districts are getting mills, the school's getting mills. And so have I equated it to a percent? No, I have not. I have in the past, I just don't remember, Paul. I can get that for you though. I have a big spreadsheet on it.
Anything we can do to have a better picture of how that revenue actually comes in.
I'd have to go look at it because it's an assessor thing, and I do have a spreadsheet on it. I just don't remember the exact percent what that would mean to us, but it's pretty low.
That's been my impression over the time that I've been here on the city council, is that it's relatively low, or at least it's comparatively low in terms of what goes into the county.
I'll look at it, but I don't know off the top of my head.
You bet. Thanks.
Malia, this is Jane. I'm wondering if we need to remind folks of the storm drainage enterprise fund possibility at this time, or if you just want to wait until
I think
the work session.
No, I am looking at. We've contracted with Wood. We're in the middle of questionnaires at this point. I'm actually answering the questionnaires for them, and they're reviewing different methodologies and ways to begin. If you guys desire to do a storm drainage enterprise fund, I think they're going to give us different levels of funding, not a full up, not whatever, and just an overview of what that means. But we're in the process of doing that, and we just begun the process. We will try to bring it to council. I don't know how long it's going to take them, but fall, spring, for a work session.
Okay, thanks.
Council, if you would like to see the detail, a dollar detail of the general fund revenue forecast, that is on page 32, which is the last page Malia kind of touched on. And there is also a little bit of detail on our capital-related revenue following that on page 33, which is similar to what you reviewed last month when we looked at the capital budget. So if there are other questions about revenue, now's a great time to talk about those. And we're going to move from revenue into the recommended expenditure budget for the general fund next. And that starts on page 34. Okay, I don't see any questions, so I'll move into expenditure recommendations on page 34. let's see. So, Council, as you know, we make recommendations to you for how to expend the revenues that we receive based on a number of factors, most notably the City Council's goals, which are a major consideration. So you'll find those restated on page 34. We also make recommendations for routine adjustments to our operating expenditure based on things like inflation, based on salary increases for staff that trend equally with the market, and other just inflationary and cost of business factors. In this budget with respect to personnel, there is a 2% performance-based increase recommended to be set aside for fiscal 22. We have, of course, most of our recommendation being discussed last month in the capital and construction budgets, excuse me, but as you well know, the largest part of our expenditures in the operating and maintenance budgets, which we're discussing tonight, is by far personnel. So if we move to page 35, you'll see just some history of our expenditures in the general fund by department, looking at actual expenditure in 2019 and 2020. There's a year-to-date actual recorded for you through April 7th when we printed this budget, and then you'll see the current year's budget as adopted, and then the recommendation for fiscal 22 starting on July 1st, and that's in your most right-hand column. If you look at the total overall, you'll see that in fiscal 19 and fiscal 20, total expenditures were about $30 million in 2019, $28.9 million in 2020. This year is still out. We don't have final numbers yet, just because of the date of printing of this document. In current year, we have 34.6 recommended in expenditure, and for fiscal 22, recommending 38.7 million. It's important to note that while it appears that budget is growing, a lot of the funds that comprise the fiscal 21 and fiscal 22 budget are in fact what we call rebudgeted projects or rebudgeted expenditures, wherein we may not have finished a project in the previous fiscal year, and so we'll carry that budget forward. As you look at the second half of page 36, you can kind of see how the recommended expenditures break down by department as a percent of overall general fund expenditure. And this is a trend that those of you that have been on council for a long time are well familiar with. Our fire and police departments, basically our public safety services, are located in those departments, including both strict policing and strict fire suppression, but also emergency medical services, ambulance, animal control, dispatch, E911, and records, all in those areas. And those public safety areas really comprise the lion's share of the general fund budget, coming in at 41% overall. Parks and Recreation accounts for about 11%, Public Works 15%. Remember, this is just operating and maintenance, so you're not seeing those capital expenditures in here. Of course, if you did, then Public Works would be a much bigger number than 15%, where we're making those investments in our street and our water and sewer and wastewater systems. And then you have City Administration, Human Resources, and Administrative Services comprising 10, 1, and 5% or 16% collectively. Our general government expenditures, which these are really citywide expenditures, are about 16%. And I should have thrown the city attorney's office in general administration as well, which would bring us to 17% for general admin. On the right-hand side of the bottom of page 36, you can see those same numbers depicted by type of expenditure versus by department. And so, as I mentioned earlier, if you look at the very bottom of that chart, personnel in our operating and maintenance budgets accounts for the lion's share of all expenditures at about 56%, or a personnel budget of just slightly more than $21 million per year.
Excuse me.
Yes, please.
Does personnel also include the benefits, like the money into the insurance pool for benefits? Is that part of personnel?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Doherty. That's a great question. Yeah, when we say personnel, we mean salaries and all benefits, all personnel-related expense.
Thank you.
Yes. Does it answer? Thank you. You can see, Council, as I look at that as well, debt service, interfund operating transfers, and interfund capital transfers are also a significant expenditure. So there's just kind of a quick overview of our O&M
May I ask
budget.
another
Yes, please.
question? So there are capital expenses in the general budget, right? And so what Jen was just explaining to us is that we have the capital budget that we talked about last month is things that we can't really count on because we can't, but there's still, this general budget still has capital projects in it, right? But,
Yes, Councilor Doherty,
because it's more or sustainable, things that we can count on the money. Is that the difference? I think that's what I heard.
I think that's a fair statement. So you are correct, Councilor Doherty. There are capital projects in the general fund, but they tend to be discrete, one-time, and much smaller projects, like, for instance, small construction projects on buildings. What we've done this year, and we talked about last month, with our major capital construction projects, is we've moved a lot of funding for capital construction into the major capital construction fund that we covered last year. And the difference is not being discrete, maybe one-year projects, but these are big, large projects in terms of scope, size, and monetary expenditure that often bridge over multiple years. A good example, I think, would be the Northside Tank project, which we reviewed last month as part of our capital construction budget. And it's been, a 5-year project. We're getting ready to go under construction. By the time it's done, it'll probably be 7 or 8 years long, and it's in excess of $10 million. The capital projects you're going to see in the O&M are just more minor issues, sort of minimal maintenance, and may involve some minimal construction.
Thank you.
City Manager, is it fair to say that one of the reasons that we take that approach to budgeting is because, as compared to other areas where we have to commit dollars, we have a little bit more flexibility as a city government in terms of how we prioritize and schedule some of those projects, and a little bit more flexibility in terms of timelines, whether we move them up or move them back. So it provides us the ability to take a look at our revenue picture and then decide where we're going to commit capital dollars and to what.
Yeah, Mayor, I think that's a really good way to put it. There's certainly latitude in the small capital projects that we have in general fund that are more maintenance related that we're looking at tonight. And a good example would be freezing those projects and those expenditures when COVID hit, and we weren't certain how that would affect revenue. So I think that's a fair statement and a good way to put it.
I think it's important to go over that a little bit so people have, if they're curious, can understand that that's an approach that we take, is moving forward with those when we can, but when we have something happen, like you mentioned last year, or when we have perhaps fluctuations in sales tax collection or something like that, we can reassess those things during the budget process and say, we'll have to delay that project, or we'll have to maybe trade off a large project for a number of these smaller, as you described them, maybe more ongoing and spending needs. And I just think it's good to cover that in case anybody looks into it. That is the approach that we take.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification, Mayor. That is helpful. We sometimes we have so much lingo internal down here that I think it's important that when you guys help us break these things down in ways that avoid the lingo and are more maybe helpful for the public to understand. Thank you.
Yeah, and I apologize. I don't mean to be redundant, but that's exactly the point of stopping every once in a while in these discussions to sort of say, and the reason we do that is, and that's just an example. So anyway, thank you.
I agreed. To that point, if you look at that page that we're on, page 36, on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see our capital projects, studies, and equipment account for about a little more than $5 million of our operating and maintenance budget, or about 14% of the budgeted expenditures we're recommending for fiscal 22, which is really your second largest category after those personnel expenses, salary, benefits, et cetera. So I'm going to move to the next page, counselors. That'll put us on page 37, City Clerk. a little more different perspective and chart at the top of page 37 here, looking here not only at budgeted expenditures, but looking at our actual expenditures for fiscal 19 in total and fiscal 20. And you can see a similar trend to what we've looked at before. I wanted to touch on this page in particular on our full-time equivalent authorizations, or basically the number or amount of staff that we have here at the city. You'll see in the chart in the right-hand column, we do track very carefully our position allocations here at the city. You can see in fiscal 20, we had 210 full-time benefited positions, 210 staying stable in 2021. And in fiscal 22, we're actually down one authorized position. This is the removal of our community risk reduction division chief position in fire, which was kind of a temporary position. What we typically do, as you know, if you look back historically over the past 10 years, the city is really judicious in expanding our personnel resources. It is the authority of council to allocate or unallocate these positions. And so when you've given us, for instance, in this year, an approval of 210 positions, we oftentimes reassign or re-envision and reconfigure those positions, but never exceed your 210 authorized positions throughout any given year. So we really try to keep our staff levels from growing in order to maintain that balanced, both balanced generally and also structurally balanced budget that we've been seeking to achieve for the last 4 and 5 years. And the reason for that is we want folks when they work here to know that we're working to maintain continuity in our personnel resources, and we're not laying people off every few years because maybe we overstaffed in times when we had additional revenue, and then when that goes away, we're scaling back. One of the better ways typically to handle that, and clerk, I'm going to move to the next page, 38, but one of the better ways obviously to handle that in a way that the city has often handled that is to bring in contractual help for specific jobs, and you see that reflected on the previous page in the contractual expenditure. That is about 13%. Not all of that is contracting for personnel services, but some portion of it is, and contracting for those one-time discrete personnel projects versus hiring full-time staff that you would carry for years is typically a more expeditious way to get things done, but also a more cost-effective way. So getting to the meat and potatoes of what's being recommended for fiscal 22 council on page 38, there are 3 charts that start here. The first is operating supplementals on page 38 and continuing on page 39. The supplemental requests are changes to the budget from the current year and money that we're going to add or we're going to subtract in the next year. If you scroll down, I'll talk you through the chart really quickly here. I'm looking at the top at page 38. It shows the division, a little description of what's being requested, the amount of money being requested, and whether that is going to be a one-time expenditure for one fiscal year or if it's going to be anticipated to be ongoing across multiple fiscal years into the future. So if you scroll down, we have about $32,000 in administrative services, $7,000 in human resources being recommended. Scrolling on to page 39, in our general government, this is citywide expenditures, $102,000. And then down, continuing on to page 40, a few other minor adjustments for Parks and Recreation, Fire, and IT. And really getting to the bottom line on the bottom of page 40, we are recommending in total a $187,538 adjustment or increase to the fiscal 22 budget over fiscal 21. That amounts to about 0.5%, slightly less than 0.5% adjustment from fiscal 21 to 22. As your department heads go through their presentations here quickly in a few minutes here tonight, they're going to focus on accomplishments from the previous year, just highlighting a couple major issues. Looking then to the future, they're going to talk about a couple major initiatives they expect coming up in fiscal 22. And if, as they talk about their department, if any of these operating supplementals you'd like to question further, please feel free to. Either the department head or myself can address those. I didn't want to dwell too much on these, though, considering that I'm really only recommending less than 0.5% change. And of those, a fairly significant number, I think 9 of those are one-time expenditures for this year, many of them related to the ongoing software implementation project that we are starting in and will continue to be in for our enterprise resource planning software for probably 3 to 5 years. That's the first of the adjustment charts. So then if you look on page 41, you'll see what we call centrally budgeted adjustments. And this is work that our finance staff do to just adjust basic routine business expenses according to trends that we see in the economy. So for instance, if cell phone charges are going up, well, we need to adjust the budget for that. Or if electricity costs, natural gas costs are going up or down, we adjust the budgets accordingly. The net amount of our centrally budgeted adjustments is $4.6 million. And you'll see at the bottom of page 42 that the vast majority of that, before I give everybody a heart attack, the vast majority of that is just interfund transfers, as noted at the bottom of page 42. Really only a few $1,000s is being adjusted for true operating and maintenance internal adjustments for ongoing business costs like natural gas. Did that make sense, Council? You get to the bottom of page 42 and you see 4.6 million in it. It looks a little scary.
Is it fair to say that what we're talking about here are sort of adjustments for the cost of continued services, the same services that we provide each and every year, and those costs increase, and we have to budget those increases so we can continue to do that? For instance, mosquito control or something of that nature.
Yeah, I would say, Mayor, these are just the cost of doing business kinds of expenses. Like I said, paying the light bill, paying the gas bill. If you look at the bottom of page 42, you'll see that the total ongoing adjustments for those just overhead business kinds of expenses, we're actually adjusting the budget downward by $9,000. But when you add in the capital transfers to the major capital construction fund and then the recreation center support transfer that we're going to talk about at the end of the meeting tonight, which is $1.3 million, that's how we total up to central budgeted adjustments of $4.6 million.
Okay. Yeah. If we're using more electricity and electricity costs X, we have to budget to pay for it. That's not really something that's discretionary.
Right. Or if they lower the cost of electricity, we can lower what we budget for those payments over the year. Exactly. Unfortunately, we are going down by $9,000 based on some changes that we see in those just ongoing recurring expenses.
Great.
Okay. So we'll dive into the detail of the major fund transfers. We've already looked at major capital, but Recreation Center we'll get into a little bit later in the evening. As I move to the following page, page 43, you'll see the third of these expenditure recommendation charts, and these are the recommendations for adjustments to personnel, particularly. As I noted previously, we are not asking for additional positions. We work within the allocation Council have given us to utilize those positions in the most effective way every year for getting city business done. There are very minor adjustments being recommended to personnel. Most of these are being offset by other allocations and are related to one-time projects that we're doing, such as the enterprise resource planning software implementation, where we need to just bring in some additional staff support. So for instance, the first item you see there, municipal court, software project support. There's a description there. We estimate of the $21,570 I'm recommending that will be one time, that about $10,000 of that is rebudgeted from a prior year. So in total, there's only about $11,000 I'm recommending additional there for one time to build up our staff resources and move us through that software implementation. And I should be clear, I said enterprise resource planning, but this is actually a separate issue in the municipal court for software that they're working on, but it's a similar concept. If you look at the bottom of page 43, you'll see this chart totaled up. So the total recommended personnel requests that I'm putting in front of you are $31,072, of which you can see 1, 2, 3 of the 6 are one-time expenses. 3 of the 6 are ongoing, and one of them is actually a downward adjustment of $10,246 to reduce the overtime budget in finance because we've apportioned full-time equivalent positions so that we won't need this overtime anymore. So Council, those last three charts really are the meat of what I'm recommending in terms of change to the budget. We'll touch on them generally in the department presentations that are coming up. And if there aren't any questions, I wish I had more interesting or bigger numbers to share with you, but our changes are very modest this year. And in part because I think we need to be conservative and fairly modest in our approach, given we're coming out of COVID, but we still don't know what a post-COVID world looks like in so many ways, including for revenue, as you've heard from Malia and from our Deputy Director of Administrative Services. So we took a pretty cautious approach.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's always prudent for the city of Laramie, and probably more so with every year. I see that COO Brown has her hand up there.
Yes, Mayor, if it's okay, just to come back to just the property tax issue, because I pulled up the sheet so you guys can get the answer.
Sure.
Basically, it's about 11.4% of City of Laramie property tax, and that's what I'm trying to get at. There's other property tax they collect, such as Rock River and fire districts and all sorts of stuff. So that's why I can't give you an overall percent, but our mills are 8 out of 70 of City of Laramie. And so on that one piece, we get 11.4%. But it's not the overall piece because it's special levies and all sorts of stuff. That's why I can't give you that number, but does that answer? Okay.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Okay.
And I thank you for following back up with us, because I think that's, again, one of these points of information that are useful for people to try to build their understanding of, which is that of all the property taxes collected in the county, some of those are directed towards specific things like the recreation mill levy. Right. And as you mentioned, there are some other categories. Then there are those property taxes that are collected only within the city of Laramie. But even those property taxes that are collected within the city of Laramie only receives a percentage distribution.
11.4%. Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. I really appreciate that. And City Manager, I don't know if you were ready for us to maybe ask any questions or follow up with anything from the last portion of your presentation. I think you were.
Yes, I was, absolutely. And then we'll move into looking at specific departments next.
Okay. And I just was going to encourage the council, not that our folks need a lot of encouragement, but if you have questions about areas where we're spending money or could be spending money on personnel, or ideas about where we might have some critical needs and we need to take a look at that, this is the time to be having that discussion in this work session where we have people that can hear those questions, and if they need to, they'll have time to do that background research, or we can look at the finer points of that, or ask that the finer points of that be looked at so that that information can then be shared with us. And I know you all know that, but it's the time to have that discussion. Vice Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and welcome. My question is for Janine. Of the authorized positions, are any of those frozen?
Vice Mayor, thank you. That is a good question. And the answer is yes. Some of those positions are frozen currently and have been frozen for some time. Frozen, for edification of newer counselors and the public, means although the council have authorized that, say, one full-time equivalent position, the manager or managers, department heads, have determined for a variety of reasons to not hire or not fill those positions. So they're frozen for any hiring purposes. An example would be, I have a frozen position in my office, which is the vacant position for our economic development and community relation, or not community relations, but community projects person. So in my office, there are, I don't know exactly, isn't that funny? I don't know how many positions are in my office directly, but one of those is unfilled or frozen. So there are a number, Vice Mayor, and I apologize, I don't know the number offhand. It seems to me we had 7 or 8 frozen, and if finance or HR know, they're welcome to weigh in if they want to correct my number.
City Manager.
The reason that our positions have been frozen is to maintain resources through COVID, right? And also with respect to like the position in my office that I talked about, it's because we know that that things are changing in the community with respect to economic development and other matters. So we want to bring that position back in the right shape and form to suit our needs as they evolve and change for the community and for the organization.
Great, thank you.
City manager, so those positions aren't unpacked or unraveled for us further in the document?
I believe that they are further down in the document, Mayor.
Okay. So,
if not, it's an easy matter to get them to you. We publish them as well in our workforce report every year.
I think my point was that simply because you don't have them at the top of your head is okay, because I think they're broken out here in the document that we're about ready to dig a little deeper on. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Mayor, I had a question.
Yeah, go right ahead.
And hopefully, I had to step aside for just a moment, but hopefully, Janine, you haven't already covered this, but I was just curious for an historical perspective on the peak number of employees that the city has had and now where we stand, because I know we're way down from where you first started. And I think that would be kind of interesting to have you discuss where we are now to where we were, 4 or 5 years ago.
Right. Mayor and Council Member Gabriel, I could pull those up, but I wonder, since we do have, let me make sure we've got Lori tonight on the agenda. I think I have HR in here. Yes, I do. I think I'll set that question aside if you don't mind and we actually have Human Resources tomorrow. So if it's okay with Council, I'd love to set that question aside and let our Human Resources Director address it. I can pull it up really quickly in the workforce report, but I think she'll do a better job for us tomorrow if that's okay with you guys.
We will wait. Thank you.
Sounds good. Interesting question.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question if I could.
Yeah, please.
I apologize if I missed this. I was in the middle of the Vice Mayor's question. My Zoom crashed, so was hopping back in. So I apologize if this was covered. But Janine, I saw that the city manager's office lost 2.5 positions in total, and I know one of those positions specifically is a fairly dynamic and important position to the city. And I don't know. I know the Vice Mayor was asking about positions being frozen. So I'm curious, particularly in that sort of grants manager realm and economic development specialist, if that is one of those positions, and if there's any intention of working to fill that, or if that's something council needs to address, or if you see that as a significant need for the city. I certainly do, but you are tasked with running all of these things, so I'm certainly willing to hear what you have to say on it. So I don't know, I guess the question would be, would the council need to authorize another position? Because I see that you've removed those 2.5 from your department, but they've been largely added elsewhere. So we're talking about removing positions elsewhere or adding one to yours. And so I'm just curious what you're thinking about that. And I'm sorry, council, if this has already been covered.
Through you, Mayor, Councilor Harrington, I appreciate that question. I did touch on that position. Our community economic development and community initiatives administrator position remains open and unfilled. Purposefully, we do really need that position, to be honest, or we need some version of it. And the reason that I've left it unfilled for these remaining few months is because I want to make sure that we understand the changing landscape with respect to economic development in the community and what the needs are. Before we just hire for that position. We always try to take a really thoughtful approach when a position is made vacant here to not just hire back for that position just as a matter of course or on sort of automatic, but to really think about what are the needs and have they changed, and then tailor the position if needed and when necessary to changing needs. So I do think that's an important position. I do think we'll move on it this year. It is authorized by council, so I don't need any authorization from you all to hire for it. I just want to hire the right person for the right job. And the best way to do that is understand what the right job is first before you try to scout for talent.
Thank you, City Manager, and thanks everybody else for bearing with a repeating of that. I appreciate it.
Councilor Harrington, that was just fine. And frankly, this is such an important piece of this discussion, City Manager. And I know the council is really glad to hear you outline that position that way, because it is a very, very important piece of our city staff setup. And that position is so closely related to so many of the goals that we've discussed and set forth when you talk about what that position does in terms of community projects and how that relates to things like affordable housing investigation and strategy, the economic development plan, and some of the things that we hope to achieve through that. I personally am just relieved to hear that it has that level of critical need also identified by your office as well, because I think the council shares that view, because as I said, and once again, it's just so linked with so many of the things that we've outlined as policy goals. So I appreciate this discussion and Councilor Harrington's question. Thank you.
City Mayor and Mayor Weaver, City Manager and Mayor Weaver, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to offer a clarification related to Councilor Harrington's question. Please. I believe what the councilor is seeing is a reduction noted in city administration on the FTE chart. City administration actually includes multiple departments, including information technology, and the GIS function has actually been transferred this year from city administration to public works. And so that's the movement you're seeing. It's not related to these positions that have been discussed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for jumping in with that. And that is also the kind of information that helps us get a better perspective. I think sometimes it can be confusing to see those interdepartmental switches. They have to be reflected in the budget, but of course, without that context that we were just provided, sometimes we're not really sure. Does that wrap that up for you, Councilor Harrington? Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate it.
No, not a problem, and no need for apologies about things. I mean, everybody's got stuff going on in the background. City Manager, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So we're going to start on the next page, which is page 44, and really look at a little more detail on our specific department and division or cost center level budgets. I will tell you, though, because there is so little change being recommended for fiscal 22, it was not my intent to spend a lot of time in this area. I budgeted about 45 minutes, so that's about 5 to 10 minutes per sort of functional area. But I don't want the council to feel rushed. If you have questions, please, ask those as you would like to, and we'll take as much time as we need with this. So starting on page 44, as our Deputy Director for Administrative Services just pointed out, this reflects what we call City Administration Department. Not really a department like, say, the police department is, but it is the core internal service departments that serve the city. So you see this includes the city manager's office, the city clerk's office, the city council's budget, our code administration and enforcement section's budget, our planning office's budget, and our information technology budget. And so you can see most of these are serving internal functions of the city. I'm going to reflect mostly on the charts just because I think they're nice, quick visual ways to understand where money is apportioned in these respective areas. So for city administration, you can see the breakdown of all of those costs, which is $4 million by those different functional areas. So for instance, code administration at $487,794 accounts for 12% of the $4 million that the city is recommending to expend in fiscal 22 for administrative functions. And then on the right-hand side of page 44, you can see in the pie chart there, breaking that down by the type of expenditure or the category of expenditure. And as you will see consistently throughout our operations and maintenance budgets, personnel-related expenses, these are salary, benefits, etc., are going to account for the lion's share of all of our operating budget. I will lead off, as I had asked our department heads to do, talking about the city manager's office on page 45. What I've asked them to do, and you'll see this consistent throughout the presentations, is we like to share with the council and the public some of the notable accomplishments that we felt like we achieved in the previous year, and then identify some notable objectives for fiscal 22. Oftentimes there are many, many, many of these, so I've asked the department heads, and I'll hold myself to it as well, to really just highlight a couple of each that we think are meaningful, and in particular touch on the goals of the city council, and maybe not so much on just general operating or management goals that city staff may have had in their managerial function. So from fiscal 21, one of our significant accomplishments, as you know, council spearheaded out of the city manager's office, was the final adoption of the 10-year economic development plan, or our Thrive plan, to replace Chapter 9, our old version of economic development plan that existed in the comp plan. We will, in the upcoming year, we have an objective for fiscal 22 to consider, as you know, through your adopted goals, retooling and rebooting the economic development plan. It's sort of a weird shame, if you will, that we adopted that in late January of 20, and then 2 months, maybe even 6 weeks after that. The world of work really was affected by COVID and continues to change, as does local economic pressures, local economic pulls and pushes. So for fiscal 22, an objective would be to reevaluate our economic development plan and just make sure that we have adequately considered post-pandemic consequences, and maybe slightly tweak it if we think we need to, and we'll do that working with our consultant and our economic development partners. Another accomplishment from 21 I would draw your attention to, because it ties to council direction and goals, is we did complete research and ultimately recommend, and council was favorable toward establishing an ad hoc police and community working group. We're in the planning phases right now of that, and hope to, as an objective in fiscal 22, complete that group's work, and we'll be facilitating that work and helping that group of community volunteers to move through that. So I'll let you read the rest of it, but those are a couple notable items that I would point out. With that, if you have no questions, I'll let the clerk touch on a couple of her items, and then we'll move through the remaining sections of city administration.
I have a question on that. What is the budget for the facilitator? I've heard a statement, but I want to make sure I heard it correctly.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, Councilor Schuster. We don't know yet. We did receive the proposals that were submitted in response to our request for proposals, and you'll actually have that on your agenda a week from today on Tuesday for approval.
Okay.
Okay, City Clerk, I believe page 46 is yours if you'd like to highlight an accomplishment and a goal. And also if you would touch on the City Council budget, which is on page 46, continues on page 47, if there's anything notable you'd like to mention there. And Council, as you know, and for the public, the City Clerk does manage the City Council budget under the direction of the City Council. So that's why I let her cover that. But you guys are welcome to weigh in on your budget as well.
Thank you, City Manager and Mayor. One of our big goal accomplishments is kind of a combined effort of IT as well as the City Clerk's office with replacing the audio equipment that was failing for our broadcast system, along with TK Enterprise, who does our broadcasting for us. As we experienced this last year, it failed multiple times on us, and so it was a necessary change to get updated. Also beginning the collaboration with the Albany County commissioners to get work sessions set up regarding aquifer protection. So those are a couple of the big things that we accomplished in 2021. Going forward into 2022, we are going to continue increasing our Did You Know kind of flyers. I don't know if you've noticed those on the news flash. Departments are starting to pick those up even more and doing them on their own as well. But we are making as many efforts as possible to try to make sure that we're keeping the public informed as situations continue to change with pandemic and just change in times in technology. So those are a couple of the big things. As far as expenses go, we didn't have any large expense changes for city clerk's office or for the city council. We do have changes every year within our budget because publication costs change depending upon the meetings we have and length of ordinances and things like that. But we do have some continued costs for support of that audio equipment and things like that this year. But other than that, I don't think we had very many large changes to our budget.
City Clerk, a question about that. And the audio visual equipment is what I mean. And I'm curious what kind of shelf life we're looking at out of the upgrades that we just were able to implement. And the reason I asked that question is that I think the equipment that we were using and had been using for quite some time was pretty dated. And I'm wondering how long we're going to be able, or we're expecting to be able to rely on the new and upgraded equipment before we have to look again at potentially spending some money on that. And if you have an idea about that, please share it. If that's something you want to look into and provide us with later, that's okay also.
Mayor, if I could defer that to Jonathan Rhodes, our IT manager. He probably has a better idea of our length.
You bet.
Yeah. The previous equipment that we had, you're right, was about approaching 9-10 years old, which is a little bit aged with video and the way technology goes. The new piece of equipment we got is a brand new piece that just came out. Lifespan, generally about 7 to 8 years is what we would anticipate from that. The new equipment we have kind of can go above and beyond what we were doing before. It has support for full 4K video. We're not at that point yet where we're doing production in 4K. But the newer system we got is also more of a hardware-based system. It's a little bit more robust than the system we had before, so we don't anticipate some of the same issues that we had previously. But our plan would be to, in 5 years, do the evaluation and then request budget within, probably 7-8 years for upgrade if needed to that equipment or replacement of that equipment. Maybe a little bit more proactive than we were with the previous equipment that we ended up having completely unexpected failures on. It was working fine, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. But sometimes it happens with technology.
Especially when you're really relying on it and really need it to function without problems. So I guess, and I really appreciate that, Mr. Rhodes. So I guess what I want to reflect back to you, the city manager and the city clerk is, in light of what we just heard, is this maybe an area in this budget where we sort of want to implement something similar to a replacement schedule kind of idea on that 7 to 8 year plan, and it could be that we don't need to replace it every 7 to 8 years, but do we want to sort of plan on that so that we're keeping up with changes and other aspects of that we need to keep pace with, so that our broadcasts and our ability to record and broadcast the meetings are up to snuff, if you will? And do we need to do that formally, or do we just need to kind of just request from the staff that we sort of approach it that way and keep that in mind?
Yeah, Mayor, I think that's such a great suggestion, and thank you. I suspect that IT has already factored that in, but if they haven't, we hear you loud and clear. And I think with the demand for technology, it used to be we just broadcast your meetings on cable access channel, but now, boy, we're in a whole different area, aren't we, from COVID? That probably would have happened eventually, but we certainly turned up the timeline on that. So yes, we will incorporate those elements and consider them in our overall IT and equipment replacement schedules. Yeah. Jonathan, you want to add anything?
As we're doing kind of more long-term planning for IT equipment, our equipment schedule, I've made sure to add the council equipment to that schedule, and other things as well. We're not using them now, but the microphones in the chambers, generally will last a long time, but you got to be aware of, having budget available and requesting ahead of time for those things as they come. So they are in our equipment schedule now to look at regularly.
And I'm not surprised, and thank you all very much for that little sidetrack on that information. But I'd hate to see us going, every 10 years and then only replacing that stuff when it fails. But we're not going to do that. So thank you.
Yes, we don't want to do that. We agree. Thank you, Mayor. So, Council, moving on to Code Administration and Planning and Code Enforcement. This is starting on page 48. These
Janine?
divisions are yes.
Sorry, can we go back? I'm sorry. I guess my question is, when we do our surveys, of our community surveys, do we ask a question related to how folks are engaging? Are they watching on the cable station? Are they using YouTube? Are they using Facebook? And I think if we are not, I think that might be a good consideration, given the many options of streaming our meetings.
Vice Mayor, we do ask a question like that, but I will tell you this. I think that question, when we do our survey, and I think it'll be next year, not fiscal 22, but 23, I've spread it out a little bit this year for budgetary reasons, but I think we're going to have to revamp that question in a post-COVID world, particularly with Zoom and all these video meetings. What I will tell you, and I'm pulling that up right now, but my recollection is that most people, this is always like the question we ask and the result dismays us every time, but the results typically for years has said people get most of their information about what the city's doing from their friends and neighbors, which we're always a little concerned because, your friends and neighbors might have it right, but they might not too. But yeah, we do ask about the cable access channel. We ask about print media. We ask about radio. And it's been all over the place. Some of you might remember that for years. It's been all over the place, hit and miss, as that communication part of our community changes, right? People moving from print to more digital medias, things like that. So I think we're going to have to revamp it this next time. And honestly, I'm not sure that many people watch on cable access anymore with us now streaming video meetings online. And I think that that's likely to change a lot into the future. But there are key people, particularly some of our older folks, who really rely on the cable access broadcast. So maybe something that we don't have a lot of participants, but we maybe don't want to get rid of it because the participants who do access it that way may not have access to the internet or to Zoom, etc.
Right, exactly. Thank you.
City Clerk.
Yep, I'll take a screenshot of that question and send it to you guys in email just to kind of refresh your memory. And if you're curious, it's on the city website under Citizen Survey.
Thank you.
From 2019, that was our most recent survey year.
Interesting question. There's been some discussion about this recently, and of course there's been discussion about it in terms of even the state legislature's approach and how they want to continue to allow people to interact and the various pathways they want to make available for public input and things like that. City Clerk Kasey had a hand up there.
Mr. Mayor, I didn't want to distract from what you're currently talking about, but we did have a question from a counselor to just ask if we could address the council budget, personnel budget, to make sure that the public understand that the council doesn't have that $412,000 divided amongst 9 of you, that you are paid $120 per special meeting, work session, or regular meeting. So the budget for council is set as that, so we can pay you accordingly as you attend meetings throughout the year without having to come back for adjustments. So we don't always expend all of that, but it's there in the worst case scenario.
Thank you, City Clerk, and it's probably better to explain that in terms of what councilors receive for serving as a member of the city council more as a per diem per meeting attended. There's not a salary. There are no benefits included in that. It's a per diem per meeting attended. I think that's the way to unpack that. City Manager?
Thank you,
looks
Mayor.
like we're ready to go.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good way to characterize it. We code it under personnel just because that's the name of that category of type of expenditure, but you're right, it is absolutely more like a per diem. Okay, so if no other questions, I apologize I moved on too fast, but we'll go to Assistant City Manager Fieser, who oversees our planning, code administration, and code enforcement sections to highlight accomplishments and goals.
Great.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, I'm going to go ahead and leave my camera off tonight because I'm having to use technical terms, some glitchy computerness that's going on that makes me a little nervous about changing things up. So to start off with, we're going to talk about code administration, which is basically our building department encompassing the environmental health inspector also. Currently, we have 3.25 positions. We've got 2 full-timers, a half-timer, and a 3/4 time position, and we're currently searching for another full-time position. Not a lot of changes expected in this realm. To give you a little bit of an update, if you see the newest outcoming monthly managers report, the revenue for the code administration division is up 33% over last year, which is a good turnaround, so we're super excited about that. But we are trying to do that on a shoestring amount of people to keep that revenue coming in nicely. The accomplishments from fiscal year 21, if you can remember, I doubt if anybody will forget, but we were able to pass general contractor licensing, which has been very well received and been going very smoothly. We were also able to add an electrical inspector as our part-time employee, and that has got us corrected with state of Wyoming requirements related to the fire code. So we're real excited about that. As far as improvements for fiscal year, or our goals for objectives for 2022, we're going to work on the first renewal of general contractor licensing and continue to maintain our code and inspection updates to keep the community safe through that. The environmental health inspector is responsible for the inspection of all the restaurants, plan reviews for any restaurants, plan reviews for any food trucks, and inspection of food trucks. And at a 3/4 time position, he's doing very well keeping up with that. That pretty much closes everything. Clarice Hoff with Code Administration is with us tonight. If you do have any questions, we'll be happy to stop and answer those right now.
Great. Any questions for Assistant City Manager Fieser or Clarice, who really put in a lot of time on that last little bit of code enforcement that the Assistant City Manager talked to us about? Anybody have anything? Don't see anybody itching to ask a question, so. Okay.
Honorable Mayor, I'll move on to the planning division, which it encompasses our nuisance and 2 planners currently at this time. We are currently searching for an additional planner, principal planner to assist in the division. We just have a lot of stuff going on, a lot of development going on in Laramie, and it's been a long run for these folks, and we're excited to get back to a little bit more full staff as soon as we can. But the most notable accomplishment towards council goals was the executing the Thrive Laramie Economic Development Plan, and the planning division with our community and economic initiatives position leaving has taken the lead on that, and they have worked towards mostly focusing on how to improve housing opportunities in Laramie, as it's been noted as probably the most dire situation that we've been in a while. And hopefully this summer you'll see a work session to gauge council's interest in efforting 3 of the goals picked out of the Thrive plan towards housing, and then we'll work towards that for fiscal year 2022. Some accomplishments related to 2021 and the management goals was the finalization of the $300,000 brownfield grant for the west side, which was a very successful project. I think that with that being said, Derek Taney's also on the line with us tonight. I'm not sure, Derek, if you have anything you want to add, but we'll be happy to answer any questions if you have them related to planning.
Feel free to jump in. Council members or Mr. Taney.
Honorable Mayor, I did look outside and it has began to snow again. So
Great.
just want everybody to know.
Springtime in the Rockies, but as Council Gabriel knows, we need the moisture. Any questions for the Assistant City Manager or planning staff? I'll just say this. You planners are hard pressed to deal with all the planning and community development needs of this community, and it's typical for the city of Laramie to operate with 3. I think city council members that have been here for a little while would acknowledge that. For our newer council member, 3 planners are hard pressed to deal with the community development and planning needs of the city of Laramie with everything that we have going on a pretty regular basis and at a pretty regular pace here. So it would be good, I think, for that office to be able to be fully rounded out and operate in what I would describe as a more normal environment. So that's good for us to hear. Derek, since you're here, Mr. Tini, is that something that is accurate? I think for the council to understand that level of staffing, where we have 3 planners in-house, is more typical to what the city of Laramie has had and operated with over the last at least 10 years or so.
Mayor and council, yes. What we've normally had is 3 planners, and even at some points in the process have had administrative assistant help as well, directly just for our offices. As Assistant City Manager Feeser noted, that we are working on hiring that position. It's been a little bit more of a rougher go with COVID interrupting it for a year plus, and so we're hoping we can do something and kind of round out this office here soon. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your weighing in on that, and I think it's worth talking about because the planning and community development, the staff members have a lot going on, and a lot of their work requires a great deal of public outreach, and frankly, we require of them to do a lot of public outreach for obvious and important reasons, and I think the more staff capacity they have, the more effectively we're going to be able to do that. And that's going to help us make more informed decisions about all the many things that their work impacts. So I'm glad to hear that. And I wish them luck with getting that staff person in as soon as possible. Anything else for Assistant City Manager Feeser, Mr. Tini, or anything else here?
Honorable Mayor, if I could say, don't forget that planning also includes code enforcement, which is Brian Forster, and so super impressed with the work he does and what he actually maintains in this community and helps us take care of. We don't anticipate any huge expense changes, but more of the same from Brian as we go through the next year.
Absolutely, really good point to raise and remind me of, and the rest of the council. That's another really important city staff position that interacts a great deal with the public and does a lot of work for us. When we say code enforcement, we don't just mean that Mr. Forster goes around and tells people, hey, you're in trouble. He goes around and tries to help people figure out ways to address those issues so that we're not having code violations go on and people aren't overly burdened in terms of trying to deal with those things, and we keep Laramie the way we want it to be. Okay, that doesn't look like anybody else is chomping at the bit here to ask any questions. So I appreciate that opportunity to go over that because I think it's important.
Council, then the last section in our city administration is IT. And of course, we know we have Jonathan Rhodes here with us. He is under direction of the Chief Operating Officer. So Jonathan, it looks like you're going to make the presentation. Great. And we are on page 51.
Yeah, so for information technology, some of the accomplishments, the city clerk mentioned obviously the video stuff for council, but there's a lot of other departments as well that needed to have accommodations made because of COVID. So we worked with the various departments to have safe remote working procedures in place through VPN, VPN, loaner laptops, Zoom, things like that. And things went really well. We had a lot of remote workers and we were able to sustain them. So we were pleased with that. And also this last year, we have been working with the police department as we've been transitioning our public safety to our new public safety software. And that has been working well. For 2022, some of our objectives are continuing with that public safety transition, the data conversion that needs to happen, and then just making sure that the city's overall IT security is in a good position. And then we'll also help with other software implementations, such as the ERP that's been mentioned before. As far as our budget goes, pretty much the same as the previous year. There were some projects that we were not able to get to because of COVID. So there's some large re-budget requests in there. One's for the Municipal Operations Center, which hasn't been constructed yet, but that's underway. And then another for a large storage thing. So other than that, the budget is about the same as it was previously for us. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. And, you know, it's been a crazy year for everybody, but I think now is as good a time as any to acknowledge the work that the IT folks have had to do and how they've been leaned on so tremendously across city government this year because of what we need to do. Yeah, I'll join the city manager, a little applause recognition of that, and just to thank yourself, your department for the extra burden that I think you've had placed on you, given the need for all of the telecommunication and everything else this year. So thank you very much, and thank you for doing it within the budget that you've been provided and the things you've been able to achieve for us, and how that's helped keep the city rolling. So just thanks a lot, and appreciate this breakdown and this overview. And council, do you have anything for Mr. Rhodes here? I think that probably goes without saying that comes from the whole council on that appreciation and just how important that department is for the city of Laramie. So I don't think there's anything by way of questions or comments other than what we've already said there. So thanks again.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. I really appreciate that too. And I have to say, like Jonathan, as our manager, the lift that they have had to make in the last 12 months is astounding. It was just seamless. It was like, you know, we talk about that 2020 code word, how we're all pivoting, right? They went well beyond pivoting. They like pirouetted like a Russian ballet ballerina. I mean, it was amazing. So thank you, Jonathan. Great leadership. Much appreciated. Council, the next page addresses what we call our general government cost center, and these are just citywide expenses like risk management, liability, and property coverage. I thought our chief operating officer could cover this for us just briefly, and this is on page 52.
Great.
In our general government, it really is our general accounts where we have our community partners and our warm insurance and some of the things that really are not tied to any real divisions. And so we do have a lot of requests in the general accounts. We have some increases being asked for the warm insurance is going up for property and liability insurance. We have a lot of, we pay property tax on the expenditures we have to do. If we're marketing properties such as Crystal Court, we have to pay for property taxes. We've kind of put in an increase there in case we buy more property, so we have some money going in there. But basically, I can go back to some of the funding in there. Let's see if there's other thing that's back to that page. That's what I was going to go look at. See if there's anything else that's really one time. That's mainly the premiums, and we have to rebudget. We did give retirees maybe 5 years ago to help save money, an incentive on their insurance plan. This is the last year of that we're asking for that piece. And some the WAM conference we rebudgeted because we didn't do the WAM conference. So some of those are probably the major things going into the general accounts this year, but not much changes.
Appreciate that. Go ahead.
Any
City.
questions?
We'll give people a chance. It looks like the city manager was going to add something in there. Okay. Council members, any questions on that? Comments? It looks like a lot of those categories have remained relatively stable for us over the last couple of years here. And there's a few areas where we've had some kind of ups and downs, but overall it looks like it's held relatively stable. I mean, there are some changes that have to be reflected in those numbers, but I suppose what I would ask, if I could, is the contractual services and the budget amount versus actual. I think that's probably just because we're only into the 5th month of, well, that's for the fiscal year. So we're about ready to end the fiscal year. And it appears, just looking at that number, that maybe we over budgeted a little bit there, or do we still have some things that are, they're going to be coming out of that contractual services and we just haven't realized those yet? I'm just looking at those two columns, the actual versus what's budgeted for contractual services, the 633,000 versus the 1 million. Just because there seems to be that's a pretty big jump in between those two figures.
It is, Mayor. I do. Go ahead, Millie, if you have the answer.
It's okay. It is. We do on the. I'd have to see the roll up on the contractual services, but a lot of it is probably the professional and consulting, and sometimes we don't always use that money, but you need to budget for that money in case you need consulting dollars.
And so we'll roll that over and rebudget that for those future potential.
We usually don't rebudget that. We just budget again. We let that reserve go. So we don't, unless there's something like Thrive. I mean, we had a Thrive economic plan, and if we didn't spend all, in the middle of the summer and we needed it, then we would rebudget it. But we don't have anything to rebudget for that.
And of course, that's general fund dollars, right?
Yes.
So when we don't use that, then it goes back into the general
fund reserves. Yes.
Yep. I'm perfectly satisfied with the way that we do that. Any questions or comments about that? I just wanted to ask that question, Council, because there was a big change. I see Councilor Stalder. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Do we have an anticipated consultant, or that is quite a bit higher? Is there something kind of in the works?
Councilor Stalder, I think that was from the previous year. So what I think what we're looking at is budgeted and then we didn't use it. And so it'll go back into the general fund. I'm sorry.
And it's not just, it's contractual, you might have other contractual stuff going on. It's not just consultants. So it's all it's rolling up several accounts. I guess that's, it's a roll up. It's not necessarily by account. So.
Okay, thank you. I know we had talked about a water rate study, so I just didn't know if that was included, but thank you for the clarification. I think I got it.
Mayor, through you, the water rate study would be in the actual water fund.
It's a good question, Councilor Stalder. Kind of on the same lines, and I thank you, Malia, for kind of going over that with us a little bit. But it makes sense to me now. We just wanted to make sure that we weren't needing to rebudget for contractual services. So we aim a little higher. It's kind of no harm done because it'll go back into the general fund for whatever else the city's needs might be. I don't see anybody else, so I think we can just keep moving forward. Thank you both.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mayor. Next up on the next page, we have the city attorney's budget. So I'll let Bob talk you through this. There's a little change here, and if you have any questions, either Bob or I can answer those.
Is the city attorney going to?
Yeah, I had to put myself on camera.
Hi, Bob. Hello, city attorney.
Hello, Mayor. Yeah, as you can see, there is not much change in the city attorney budget. I think that the additional money that's being expended, that I wish we didn't have to expend what we
but we do, is on outside counsel expenses. I spent some of that money on, and I thank the council, because you gave me a little bit of money last year to hire as an independent contractor a very good law student, which helped on some things you know about, but things I'm not going to talk about here in the open. So that was very helpful, but there's also outside counsel assisting on other matters. As far as activities, it's pretty much steady as she goes. I mean, we're trying to keep the boat pointed in the direction it is. I think with the help of court staff, we've been very successful over this strange year in working on, working remotely as much as is as constitutionally allowed with the court. And I can't thank the court staff enough. Sean, and by extension, Malia and the staff itself. We work very well together to keep that functioning. Aside from that, my goals remain to be able to get good help when I can need it. When I need it, we're going to have our unpaid externs working this summer, and if I find another good law student to bring on board at an hourly rate, then I will do that too. So I'm open for questions.
Thank you for that. And just to remove any mystery, like most agencies, if there's ongoing or pending litigation, it's just not something we discuss in open meetings. And sometimes the city attorney's office may use those interns to help with legal research and things of that nature. Is that correct, city attorney?
You're exactly correct.
Any questions for our city attorney, council members? Looks like everybody's got a pretty clear picture about it. Appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So we're moving to the next page, which will take us into the fire department. Chief Johnson is with us, and as he gets ready to touch on accomplishments and goals from past year and goals for next year, I'll just note on page 54, you can see again actual budgets from 1920, actual expenditure that is, and then budget from 21 and the recommended budget for 22. You'll see if you look at the bottom line total for fire, fiscal 22 looks a little bit higher. Please note that that is largely driven by rebudget and also some grant funding that we are anticipating coming in. The charts at the bottom of page 54 show, as you'll see in every section, that personnel really is the major cost in the fire department. This is salary and benefits for all employees. It's about 75% of the entire department budget going to people. The other largest expenditure for the fire department, as you can imagine, is fire apparatus, equipment, vehicles, etc. And so those capital projects and vehicles tend to be a significant driver of cost in that department as well. No notable changes or increases in funding here, and the chief can jump in on page 55 and talk about those accomplishments and goals.
Honorable Mayor, members of council, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Great. I'm just going to do a real quick overview of the department and hit the high points of accomplishments and then go over a few objectives. So the LFD, we have 4 divisions operating here. They're in operations, EMS training, and then our life safety fire prevention division. The number of personnel we have is 45 sworn full-time personnel. Of the 45 sworn, we have 42 online. We have 2 non-sworn administrative, and then we have a part-time inspector. We also have a cadre of civilian drivers that are trained to drive on transfers for ambulance, which we're doing about 430 of those a year now. This year we've had 2 retirements, and then we'll have 1 pending, so we'll be putting on a recruit class this fall on a hiring round. For statistics, I think the thing you'll be most interested in, we did 4,205 calls for service last year. They're split out, 80% of them are EMS oriented. So EMS, we also do fire, structure, wildland, rescue, hazmat, and extrication. we operate out of 3 stations, and you're aware we have the training center we're working on. So we have the 3 stations, and then we have the training grounds. High points of the accomplishments. I think the biggest thing we've got going on last year and will continue in throughout this year is the special purpose project we have underway with the rehabilitation of our training ground. The next thing I have listed is just managing through the COVID. We were really affected because we responded to a lot of COVID cases in town, and being able to train, equip, and prepare our internal workforce, and then also serve the external customers who were suffering from the virus. That was a big adjustment for us, and we worked through that. We are teamed up with Cheyenne for recruit academies. We had one successful one last year, and we're preparing one for this fall. If you remember, we were joined up with the Front Range Fire Consortium for many years, and the costs and the I guess the politics of that organization, we split off from that. So we've teamed up with Cheyenne. We're looking forward to another one this year, Academy. And another accomplishment is the development and the training and the operation of the civilian driver program. That's helped our organization out tremendously with staffing issues. Let's see. I think the objectives for next year is to make sure we're on top of the special purpose tax project we have going with the drill grounds. We do meetings once a week on Mondays. That's the owner, the architect, and the contractor. And we have good lines of communication. The project's kicked off and it's going real well right now. Another objective for next year is succession training. We've had a little bit of turnover here with retirements. And we have 2 new division heads, one being the fire marshal, one being our training chief. And then our operations chief was just shifted over into that division. So we're going to need to do some training and make sure our division heads are all up to speed. And I have a learning curve there. We are transitioning all of our software and reporting into emergency reporting and target solutions. So that will take effort, and Jonathan's helped us out on that a lot. So as far as apparatus, our big project coming up for the next year would be, it'll be ambulance replacement. It'll just be the chassis. And we've been before council with the program of our ambulance replacement. And this will be the first one we're re-chassing. Actually, let me back up. We re-chassied one earlier, but it was from Iraq. We had a rollover and total an ambulance and had to re-chassis one. But this will be the first one on the schedule for the re-chassis. So, big thing, probably objective is getting back to pre-COVID activities with our public education, our inspection program. And one thing I want to talk about is the State Fire Marshal's Office has written a grant, and they're funding a program that I think is real important for our area. It's fire stops and oxygen cannulas and oxygen delivery devices, and they just kicked that off. And so the council's aware our last 3 fire deaths dating over the last 14 years have all been attributed to oxygen mishaps. So that's something we're well aware of. I was informed this morning that Laramie's leading the way in installations in the state so far. Not many installations yet because it just started, but we're gonna hit that hard this summer and make sure we try to keep our that vulnerable population safer. That's a real quick overview and the high points of the accomplishments and some of the objectives for next year. So I stand for any questions.
Appreciate that. Chief Johnson, any questions? Yeah, Councilor Gabriel, and I'll go to Councilor O'Doherty. Councilor Gabriel.
Thanks, Mayor. Chief Johnson, we've talked about this in the past. I was just curious, an update on the situation with surrounding fire departments, taking some of your qualified people that have been trained because they could offer higher salaries. Is that still a concern and a problem for your department?
Councilor Gabriel, Mayor, that's, it's always a concern. You know, we like to retain all we can. That's been about 2.5 years ago now. And we're kind of, I want to say, caught back up. We're in a normal turnover, what I would expect right now for the last few years. I believe that the implementation of the civilian driver program to relieve some of those long hours of work doing transfers, and then the going to the schedule of the 4896 has really improved morale, if you want to call it, of the department. And right now, I would say we're in what I would call a normal turnover. We'll have 3 this year, but that's all from retirement, guys that have worked careers and they're ready to move on. So.
Great, thank you.
Councilor O'Doherty, I think I saw you had a question.
Oh, I just wanted to know more about those fire break oxygen cannulas, but because you described it, I found it on Google.
Oh, okay.
So the person's in danger because the fire flashes up in their face. Is that why?
Yes, it can be anywhere between the concentrator or the oxygen source to the person. A lot of times it's someone lighting a match close to it is the most common reason. And without the fire break, it can burn. It leaves like a goes right down the hose back to the concentrating to set things on fire. And that's usually when we run into problems with the injuries, it's because we have a non-ambulatory issue and a high chance of fire environment. We're just trying to reduce that fire environment as much as we can. So
I follow up. Do we know, like, approximately how many people in our community rely on oxygen, or do we have a rough?
I don't have that number. I could probably do some research for you on that.
Oh, that's okay. I'm just wondering if you knew. Thank you.
I'm not sure how many there are, but there's several. So.
Thank you. Thank you for the overview, Chief Johnson. I don't see any other questions. As usual, like a lot of departments, it sounds like kind of adjusting back to getting ready to adjust back to a little bit more regular operation and everything else that you went over for us. So we appreciate it. Okay, I guess we're all right there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Johnson. So we have our other chief up next. We're on page 56. Just as way of introduction, while Chief Stalder gets ready to address goals and accomplishments, you'll see here the total departmental budget for the police department. Of course, it's important to note, and this has been an important bit of information we've been trying to differentiate for the public over the last year as we've had increased interest in the policing activities. That point being that the police department budget encompasses not only policing services, but a variety of other services, notably animal control, animal sheltering, our LARC Center, which is Laramie Area Records and Communications. So this is E911 and records and dispatch. And all of those things are additional services that are managed under the purview of Chief Stalder. At the bottom of page 56, you'll see this broken out. And again, personnel expenditures for salary and benefits in this department comprise 84% of all dollars budgeted and spent. That is very typical, obviously. Policing, animal control, records, dispatch, and E911 are very labor-intensive and human-driven activities. We don't have robots to do any of those things, at least not yet. So with that, on page 57, the chief can take off from there, talking about goals and accomplishments and other matters from his department.
Mayor, a member of the council had started off by saying I'm going to keep my camera off, and I've had internet instability all night long, and if I drop out like you guys have in my conversation all night, please let me know and I'll go back and repeat what I said. We actually do have a robot. It's a bomb robot, and it's a very expensive piece of equipment. I'd put our accomplishments towards council goals over the last year. Prior to last June, we did not have any council goals, really notable ones anyway. But then the resolution that was passed last June, we worked a lot on that over the last year, and council has certainly been updated on that as we've gone, and that's resulted in the formation of the ad hoc police and community group, and we'll continue to work with that. Looking forward next week to the formulation of that committee, and then over the next 6-8 months, the work that will be done on that. As far as our internal goals go, one of my biggest goals this year was that in November we went live with our new CAD RMS conversion, which was a huge 2-year project that we largely went live with last November. We're still working on going live with pieces of that. As Jonathan Rhodes mentioned, we expected data conversion back in January. That's not been completed yet, and we look forward to that. And then moving towards what I think is one of the most exciting parts of the project, which is the Citizen Connect, which will allow us to share an interactive real-time map with the public on our website that will show the public calls for service in a real-time way, and they can search past calls for service. So it's a dynamic piece. And according to my PSAP administrator this morning, we're really close to going live with that. The next big thing for us is to continue to work towards full staffing in our dispatch operation. We're allocated for 14 positions in there, and for the last almost 3 years, we've been at 8 or 9. So those 8 or 9 people have carried an incredible load over the last 3 years. The last thing I will mention as an accomplishment over the last year is we were able to work with Human Resources and the city manager last year and revise our sworn officer pay plan to make us more competitive in the state of Wyoming, as well as the Front Range and the region. So with those comments, I would take any questions that council has.
Appreciate that, Chief Stahl. Are there any questions from the council?
I just want to note that I was appreciative of the chief. A lot of the initiatives were the chief's, but they were also in line with what people were asking, and the implicit bias training, I think that was really good, and the domestic violence investigation protocols, establishing that. So I just want to thank you.
Appreciate that.
Councilor Doherty, I would add that in addition to the implicit bias training that we held last year, I'm about ready to issue a new general order on bias-free policing, which will complement both our federal harassment policy as well as our community interaction policy, which already indicates the need for officers to remain bias-free. So we'll have multiple policies in place to address implicit and explicit bias operations within our department, understanding that that's a concern. And I would note that our community relations policy has been in place since 1997, and that has always addressed the need for our officers to remain bias neutral.
Other
Thank
questions? Thank you, Councilor Doherty. Other questions for the Chief? Chief Stalder, I think it's been a demanding year for law enforcement. I think it's always probably the demanding time to be in law enforcement, but we acknowledge that. And I want to say that we appreciate the regular updates that we receive from the Chief about different issues around the environment of law enforcement that he shares with us. And he has been doing more often lately, and his perspective and views, how that might impact policy at the city of Laramie. So appreciate all those things and this overview. Doesn't look like we have any other questions, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mayor, so we'll move to the next page in your document, which is page 58. This is starting the Parks and Recreation functions budgets. And I'll give a quick overview while Assistant City Manager Todd Feeser prepares to address this section, which all of these functions are under his management oversight. So there are, I think, 7 sections included here. This is general administration. We've got facilities management, our parks management, cemetery management, mosquito control, the operations of the Ice and Event Center, and recreation. I want to note recreation in this context is really more recreational offerings and programs. We do budget that separately and distinctly from recreation center operations, which we'll talk about next and which will be our last topic tonight. In total, at the bottom of page 58, you can see about $4.2 million is recommended in fiscal 21. Again, the difference between, in fiscal 22, the difference between fiscal 22 and fiscal 21 is largely carrying over of some funds and not real true additions to the budget. Of course, there is some natural growth in personnel expense there as well. Page 59 at the top, you see the charts that we've become familiar with. And you see that personnel expenditures are the largest single category, with 48% of expenditures in these various parks and recreation cost centers going toward personnel. Your next largest category is, to be expected, is capital project studies and equipment, and a lot of this driven out of the Parks Division, where we're managing some of the facilities that exist in our community parks, as well as the play equipment and other features that are located there. With that, Todd, I'll let you determine how you want to walk through each of these different cost centers. So it's all yours.
Absolutely. Thanks, Janine. Honorable Mayor, City Council, we'll go through just in order with the budget book as it goes, and we'll stay on page 59 and we'll talk about our Facilities Management Division. The Facilities Management Division, through the COVID pandemic, actually had lots of changes to their operations and providing more cleanliness and more attentiveness to cleanliness over the weekends at both the police department and LARC, and everything they've done to help reach those accomplishments. And I think just looking back across the last fiscal year, those accomplishments will speak volumes for themselves, because we've seen nothing but growth and improvement through that way. Some of the other accomplishments for 2021 were the one that was very difficult, and may not sound difficult, but the gutter replacement project up at the Recreation Center and Facilities Management was responsible for that RFQ. And it was something we'd been working on for more than a couple of years to try to figure out how it got done. But Scott Stevenson, who's here with us tonight, was able to pull that together and actually get us a fantastic project and a great improvement for the Recreation Center. Their objectives for the fiscal year 2022 is to continue the implementation of energy efficiency practices, whether it's through the replacement of new equipment or change out of lights, plumbing improvements, anything they can do to help with energy efficiency, and then continue to provide the enhanced environmental, custodial, and disinfection services that they always do. Like I said, myself and Scott Stevenson are here, and we'll take a quick pause before we move on to parks to see if there's any questions related to facilities management.
I'd like to add, if I could, Mayor, as you all think, if you have questions, similar to information technology and the tremendous pivot pirouette they did this year, facilities management and that crew did yeoman's work from everything from changing, cleaning practices on the fly when there was less clear direction on whether COVID was contractable through touch surfaces, to working to install all of the changes in our buildings that have tried to manage, airflow and particles and droplets and all those things. So again, fantastic job here, and these guys just have led, and we couldn't have continued operating without their tremendous assistance and work and fast work to change.
I appreciate the way you put that, which is that the city's operations would come to a complete halt without the willingness, would have come to a complete halt without the willingness of people to really adapt, especially in kind of an uncertain environment. And it probably wasn't a lot of fun. to try to deal with those concerns and issues. And we really, really do want to express that appreciation. Questions on this topic for our staff folks? Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll keep moving. We'll move into the Parks Division. The Parks Division, as Janita noted, houses multiple different areas. They house mosquito control, parks, cemetery, and the arborist, which are all important facets of any Parks and Recreation offered. The Parks Division itself is responsible for trails and paths, baseball field, soccer field, maintenance of large park spaces, open spaces. They even mow and trim and take care of cleaning up of detention ponds throughout the city and do a lot of work for that. You know, accomplishments towards management goals. One of our big thing in parks now is starting to address aging infrastructure. And, you know, we've done that with replacing sidewalks and doing concrete work, and we will continue to improve trails and paths, but also making improvements to playgrounds, which you'll see. The LaPrelle playground was replaced. Undine Park will open up here shortly with a new playground. And then next year, we'll even see 2 new parks in Washington and LaPrelle Park through Land and Water Conservation Fund applications. Scott Hunter's here with us tonight, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask those of Scott. In parks, some of the things that we're really looking forward to in fiscal year 22 is the early completion of the skate park addition. You know, that one we had $100,000 donated by the Friends of the Laramie Skate Park through multiple grant opportunities that they received, and then we're matching that with another $90,000 to $100,000 of specific purpose tax ballot. By all estimates, Scott Hunter has done a fantastic job in getting that project rolling. We are under design now, and we should hopefully see that installed probably in fiscal year 22, July, August, and September. Super excited to see that. We're also looking to get some repair 3.2 miles of the Greenbelt path, which is pavement path that's starting to see some aging and cracks and needs to be addressed. And so we're working on an RFQ to get a pavement contractor in here for that. If we keep moving along, mosquito control, I can't say enough about mosquito control because, you know, if you have a little hiccup or a little mistake, it gets difficult. I will warn you right now that staffing is an issue across all of these divisions in parks, mosquito, and cemetery. Right now, the applications just aren't getting turned in, and we're seeing low staff numbers. So staff is working on using extended life BTIs in different areas of water to prevent larval hatchings, which is super environmental friendly. And then we're going to have to be really conscientious about how we address mosquito control this year. One good thing that our mosquito control supervisor has been able to do is he's been able to get the big Laramie district and the little Laramie district with the same sprayer. And that sprayer is already committed to spraying all areas at one time to make sure that we're covered. There is a little bit of a hiccup because the EMAG grant was diminished for those areas, so there'll be less square footage. But we still believe by them all getting treated at the same time, we'll see some huge improvements in mosquito control this year over last year. As we move along there, we've also got the cemetery. One of the things that my cemetery crews omitted out of this was that they just recently finalized the RFQ for the design and implementation of at least phase 1 of a columbarium to help extend the lifespan of a cemetery. And you know, our arborists will continue to work on hazard trees and mitigating trees as we go through, and we'll be doing some plantings on Bill Nye this year in those new islands, so you can see some new trees coming into our system at that time. And like I said, Scott and I are here to answer any questions if you have them.
Questions on parks? Councilor Gabriel.
I had one on Cowboy Field, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate right now or not.
I think
absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, Todd, I was just curious. The Exhibition Baseball League is planning to locate in Laramie next year, still looking for an owner. And the president of the league was in town, as you know, the last part of April. And he talked about improvements to Cowboy Field, make it more fan-friendly, and then just some updates in general. I was wondering, from your standpoint, what do you see from the city's area of improvements and what that cost might be? And then what would the university's share of the improvements be? Or do you know that?
Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Gabriel. Just to remind everybody, keep in mind that the Cowboy Field is owned by the University of Wyoming, and we basically take on the maintenance functions of Cowboy Field. So this is a very difficult area for us to navigate. We have met with the University of Wyoming on proposed improvements from the Expedition League. Some have gained some favor and some have not gained some favor. But I think wholly most of those improvements, although we don't see them coming towards creating major improvements for what we currently do, will need to be borne mostly by the Expedition League or sponsors in some form or fashion if it's approved by the University of Wyoming to even make some of those improvements there. We have been working at Cowboy Field. We're getting the scoreboard reskinned, and the scoreboard, my guys are amazing, but it's just something that was kind of out of sight, out of mind. So it's going to get a new skin on it this year in preparation for the American Legion State Tournament to be held here in July. The American Legion Ball Club is going to do some painting on the inside of the field to get the brown all spruced up. We've replaced some more chain link. That old green chain link that should have never been placed where it was has been replaced with some new chain link. And we continue to make some improvements. I did recently meet with the University of Wyoming on ADA improvements that I think have finally started to make their way, some ideas, and they're actually looking at ways for us to cut ADA seating into the existing stands and provide a ramp. And I believe on that one that we might have some good shared costs between the university and the city, because ADA is good for everybody, not just people with disabilities. So I do look forward and hope we can land the Expedition League here, but oftentimes a lot of those improvements are really hard for us to put in place when they wouldn't necessarily be good improvements for the current existing uses.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilor Gabriel.
Other questions for Mr. Feaser or Mr. Hunter? Parks is one of the departments that we get maybe a little bit more information about over the year than perhaps a couple of other departments, but it's also that one where I think maybe the largest number of city residents interact with city services on a regular basis. So it's good to get the overview and the information.
Honorable Mayor, I'm super excited about the Scout Park improvements and the playground and the restroom we're going to see in that area, and I think it's going to be a major improvement that we'll see in fiscal year 22 for this community. So I'm super excited about that too.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And we had an update about that recently, and we're really looking forward to seeing that project.
Absolutely. If I could, if there's no, I see Councilor Gabriel's got his finger up.
Go for it, Councilor Gabriel.
Thanks, Mayor. I just remembered a question I wanted to ask Todd about Scout Park. I remember during our Parks and Rec Board meeting a number of months ago that a grant was awarded to a group for bike trails. Can you update us on that? I wasn't sure where that actually fell into the improvements over there.
Correct. Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Gabriel. That improvement is actually on Laramie Middle School property, and it's the field that's to the south of the football field stands. And they're planning on doing a circle track with a few different trials things, like some rocks and some structures for the students to ride over. And the intent there is the school district just recently purchased some mountain bikes for teaching mountain biking in this community, and they want to be able to use those in an area where they can give the middle school students more of a chance to improve their mountain biking skills. So that won't actually come on to Scout Park property at all.
Very good. Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right.
So if we move on to the Ice and Event Center, the Ice and Event Center this year was able to open up and operate a very heavily used ice schedule through the pandemic. with little to no problems aside from some mask issues related to patrons coming in. But super excited about what we've seen there. One of the biggest changes that we've made at the Ice and Event Center is we've moved our Adventure Club program from the Rec Center to the Ice and Event Center during the summer. We did that last year due to the coronavirus and the size of it, making sure we could spread the kids out. And it worked so well that we actually have increased the size of that program, and we're moving it back to the Ice and Event Center because it was just a nice operation to run out of there. Diminish the impact with the recreation center and having all those kids there, but they still got to go up and use all those activities and have a great camp. So that was really important. We did recently install the solar panels at the Ice and Event Center, and just today we finished all the informational kiosks, so we'll be able to close out our Blue Sky grant, and you'll see some information coming out on that here real soon. But everything at the Ice and Event Center has been really going pretty well. This year, most notably, that I'm most impressed with is they've been able to keep their personnel costs low, and so we'll see some real benefit out of the underspending on personnel this year towards the overall cost recovery of that facility. And Jody Guerin's on the line, so if you have any questions specifically related to the Ice Center, we can answer those for you.
Questions about the Ice Center? Yeah, again, I think it's just good for us to get these overviews. I mean, some of these projects, of course, we've had a little bit of information on previously, but to get the recaps and the overviews at the budget time is good. I don't see anybody with a hand up, so I guess we can keep going.
Okay. Honorable Mayor, the last one before I turn this over to Jody Guerin to give you a real good update on the recreation center itself is recreation programs. And as the city manager explained, this is more program activities that happen outside the recreation center. We're super excited. They were able to do a bike park feasibility study with the University of Wyoming, and we'll be seeing the results of that at the Parks Tree and Rec Advisory Board this month, and then we'll hopefully bring it to council here in the next few months. One of the other things that's really neat, and I don't know that we're always looking for events, but we did host the Winter Senior Olympics 2 years ago. We did not host it last year due to the pandemic, but Jody is making a push to hopefully potentially make Laramie the home of the Winter Senior Olympics, which is really just a fantastic event. Of all things, I was out there running the snowshoe event, which, you know what made me qualified to do that is apparently I own a pair of snowshoes that needed to be used, so I was out there running the snowshoe event. But it really is a huge impact on our community and hotel rooms and visitorship, and something that we're really excited to use. And then we're continuing to grab a hold of this outdoor recreation push and starting to change to where we're going to have more races and more events, even utilizing the Pilot Hill project as part of that program. So we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have there.
That is all cool to hear about and makes sense. I wish I could have been around to see how Mr. Fieser ran that snowshoe event. Any other questions on any of those topics? No? Okay. All right. I guess we better keep going.
Mayor, so we're going to skip forward. Oh, go ahead if there are questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. We're going to skip forward in the booklet over some of the other general fund departments so that we can conclude tonight in our Recreation Center Fund. As Todd said and I've mentioned, we do have Jody with us, and we wanted to just spend a little extra time on the Recreation Center operations, which, as you know, are accounted for through a special revenue fund. So we're going to move to page 78 that looks at the Recreation Center Fund specifically. We spent some time this year really providing additional information in this section of the booklet with respect to Recreation Center operations and costs and revenues. And the reason that we did that, of course, is the very significant impacts that COVID have had on our revenue to decrease it and on our expenses to increase them. And of course, you can see where that creates a little bit of consternation and concern for us as we prepared the budget this year. I want to start on 78 and just give you, or excuse me, on 79 and just give you a couple high-level points here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jody and Todd so that we can talk about what our plans are are into the future to try to address the difficulty of the current situation. So as I said, COVID-19 had some significant impacts. Jody and her staff prepared these charts working with our finance and budget division that you see on page 79. And I just think they're really quick and very telling visual looks at what happened. So on the left-hand column, you see the days of operation. And you can see the blue line is our days of operations before COVID, and the orange line is the number of days the center was in operation in 2020 in a COVID reality. And then that gray line is the best data we had through March when we published this booklet. But you can see the orange line is a lot lower and dives deeply in April as we experience closures at the facility, and if that impacts directly your revenue. And then on the right-hand column, you can see the memberships by month, starting in March of 2020 and concluding in March of 21, and you see kind of just a downward decline in in memberships, which makes sense, right? The facility was less able to be used. I won't cover much more of the detail on this page, other to mention that on the bottom of page 79, you see the average daily use, and that also clearly shows that 2020 was a hard year. I know Jody and Todd may go into more detail in some of these regards. So with that, I'm going to skip down quickly to the bottom of page 80, and you can see that the financial position for the Recreation Center Fund is not great, which we aren't surprised at, and we expected fully. In total, I am recommending in fiscal 22 a $1.3 million transfer from General Fund to the Recreation Center Fund to balance out that budget. That's a significant increase in the support that the General Fund provides for the Recreation Center Fund. It is not atypical for the Recreation Center to receive a subsidy from General Fund. That occurs almost every year, but this is on par of almost 3 times what we would normally provide in terms of that General to Recreation Center Fund subsidy. I will leave it there because I know Jody and Todd have a presentation for you and to talk about the future and what our plans are to work our way into a more positive place. And then at the end of that, if you guys have any other questions that we should come back to in terms of information in the budget booklet itself, we'll do that. But I don't want to be redundant and say anything that they're planning to talk about. So Jody, Todd, I will turn it to you unless council have questions for me.
Yeah,
Todd,
no,
do you want to lead off?
Yeah. Yep, I'll lead off, Jody, if that's all right. Just to give you a little bit of an update, as I look at page 80, and Janine pointed out the recommended transfer in 2022, and you see the transfer in 2021. When you look back to 2018, I can remember a conversation that Jody and I had when we were hoping to break $1 million in admissions revenue on an annual basis, and thought it was really attainable at that point. And then, different things started chipping away at us, whether it was some changes in new clubs in the environment or a push to get more outdoor recreation, and stuff started happening. We saw a little bit of a dip, but we were really holding our own through 2020. And then unfortunately the pandemic hit, and it's been painful. And I tell you, Jody and her staff have really worked hard to do what they can. Scott Stevenson assisted with cleanliness to just try to keep the facility open, keep it safe to the public. And my gut tells me that Jody and her staff's plans that they've presented and some of the ideas that she's going to show you tonight will help us get back to where we were a few years ago. Our whole goal is to even get better and, get better and better and continue to throw these standard operating recoveries for recreation centers out the door as we continue to exceed those, which we had been doing for clear up till 2020, and then just due to changes we had with the pandemic that were so painful. But with that being said, I know Jody's got a great presentation. She's going to go over some of the highs and lows through the last year, and then projection of how we expect to rocket past this and get back to hopefully a more sense of normal as we move forward. And I'll turn it over to Jody.
That's great.
Thank you. You can hear me all right, can't you?
You bet.
I apologize. I'm not sure why my video isn't on, but it's not. And sometimes it clogs up the works anyway. So we'll just go videoless. How's that? A couple of things I wanted to reflect on. First off, in terms of our overall trends, Todd's right that we had some declines in 18, 17. I think 17 was one of our high years, and then it started to decline in 18. I think primarily because of other competition in the local market, which was affecting us, not unexpectedly. And then in 20, at the very beginning of 20, our numbers started to look better, and we started to see increases, which was exciting until March. And then it got really painful really quickly. We closed on March 16th, and reopened again on May 18th, which is a closure of 2 months. And during that time, my staff spent their efforts researching the virus, learning what they could about airborne or air transmitted viruses, so that they knew, what were the best practices that had been in existence prior, so that we could make some plans. And so we made plans with those things in mind. Masks went into effect immediately, actually, for all of our staff. Our full-time staff that were working in the offices began to wear masks well before it was something that was required. And they put in place a number of different cleaning protocols and systems before they were even required by the governor. We had to retool them slightly once he issued his public health orders, but we were largely on track, which I was really proud of, because that was due to the research that my staff did and the development of procedures. So we were well prepared when we reopened. It did require a significant amount of staff. And as you note on the chart with the daily visits, our daily visits at first were very painful. It was very slow. And little by little, they began to increase. And over the summer, we had pretty strong numbers. And then this fall and into the early spring has been very strong. We hit about 400 users on an average a day at the recreation center, which our average for the same time period in a normal year would be about 600 people, which is good. That's members and visitors to the facility. However, that's still only about 60% revenue over where we would normally be for admissions. So we have begun to embark on planning for serious reinvigoration of our memberships, thinking that that is our best path forward in terms of getting back to revenue that we would normally see. Then we started talking about some of the other changes that we're working on in the facility and kind of longer, more strategic planning. And I reached out to a firm that I've worked with in the past on some other things and asked if they would put together a proposal. And I believe we're going to embark on a strategic planning effort that will help us do an analysis of our operations holistically. So it'll take a look at what kind of programming are we offering, what kind of revenue opportunities are there, what do our membership fees look like, what kind of benefits are we offering our members. I'm really excited about that prospect because we've already got a number of projects in the works. I'm going to show you one here in a minute. Thinking about making investments that will carry us into the future. Our facility is about 17 years old. It's been well loved by the community and well supported, and I think it will continue to be. But I think the time is right to make some evaluations of how we are doing things and see if the model we set up 17 years ago is still the model we should be using. And by that I mean, what do our memberships offer? What kind of benefits? What kind of pricing structure? How do the various categories compare to one another? How do they compare to other places around the country? And what are the trends really in terms of pricing a facility like ours? And what other opportunities might we have to generate revenue? So we're going to be working on that. Meanwhile, I mentioned that we were planning during the time we were closed. And my feeling is that when you go through something like that, the best thing you can do is plan for the future, even though there's all kinds of unknowns, because you know that you're not going to be in the same place when you get done that you were when you went in. And that certainly has proven to be the case. It was a much longer closure than any of us expected. It was a much harder hit on us, much more restrictions than any of us could have ever anticipated. But I'm really proud of the programs we offered. One of the highlights for our last year was our Adventure Kids program. And the way the health orders were structured at the time that we started the program, we were actually planning months before there were any kind of health orders. So we were kind of doing it in the dark. And our program ended up operating with, I want to say 44 children total, because in a room, you have to account for the staff. You can't just have the children. You have to, for your total capacity, include the staff. And that was what was allowable down at the Ice and Event Center. We started with the kids wearing masks and social distancing and sanitizing. And by all accounts, nobody thought that this was even going to be possible in the larger world. That was all the reports I was hearing. And I was so proud of everybody. The kids were perfectly willing and adaptable, and they had a fun time. And the first day of camp was, it was really touching. We had a drop-off protocol where the parents pulled into the parking lot at the rec center, drove through the drive-through at the Ice and Event Center, dropped their kids off. And my job that day was to stand at the spot where the parents were to wait before they got to drop their kids off and kind of fill them in on what to expect that day. And the faces of those children in the back of the car who were so excited after months of being at home, being able to get out and see some people was beyond words, really. It was awesome. So we ran a successful 9-week summer program. We didn't have any outbreaks. We didn't even really have much in the way of quarantine with our program. Staff were on board, and we felt really good going into the fall, even with diminished numbers. I think the hardest thing was to try and figure out how do you even make things work knowing that you're not going to come anywhere near capacities that would carry your revenue. So we just figured out how to run the program and focused on that. Ran a great program. Same thing with all the programs that we have continued. We've been doing swim lessons. We've been training staff. We've been offering kids programs and adult programs. And although we're restricted in our capacities because we're still attempting to abide by some type of social distancing that gives people a good opportunity to remain safe and comfortable, which is a big thing for us. We have a large senior population, and on the one hand, we could make the argument that, no restrictions required anymore, so don't bother. But a large portion of our client base is people who trust us and are looking to us to keep some of those measures in place until we get to a place where they've been told it's okay. The pandemic's over. So to some degree, we're going to continue to lift and loosen restrictions as we feel like we can and they make sense, and the community's ready for it from a vaccination standpoint. But we're still going to be somewhat measured. I don't think that necessarily means that our revenue is going to stay in decline. I don't think that the two of them are, they're linked, but they're not inextricably linked. I think that some places are seeing decent revenues, and I think ours are continuing to climb. This month was a better month than last month, which was a better month than last month. So, we're doing better as we go forward. So I'm pleased about that. One of the things that you may have noticed at the facility, we are doing some remodeling in the administrative areas to address social distancing and provide a little better spacing and work spacing. And part of that is a grand hall remodel that will provide access gates or turnstiles for the patrons that will be, some of them will be self-actuated, so they can use their membership card to swipe in automatically if they have an access or an active membership pass. And then we will have access from the lobby into the leisure pool, which I think is going to be a nice improvement. And I think streamlined services in that front desk area. Some of the problems that you have that bottleneck us in that area really have to do with isolating functions and providing them the space that they need to provide those services. So if you're needing to fill out paperwork, you don't need to be in the walkway. You need to be in a spot where you've got some space to fill out paperwork, and we're building that in. So I think in a few months when we're all done with that, you'll see some nice improvements. When we did the design work for that portion of the project, we also included design of the leisure pool remodel, because 17 years, our pool is well overdue for a plaster resurfacing, and also our water climbing features are showing their age as well. So we took on an effort to put together a new design. And Nancy, I sent you the pictures. If you wouldn't mind pulling some of those up, it'll give you an idea of what we're looking at. things that we are going to be addressing in a pool remodel. This comes under the category of wholesale investment and renovation. So this is an area that you're looking at facing the outdoor pool locker room hall from inside the leisure pool. So this is an area where when we have the entrance into the leisure pool, you'll walk in here, and if you looked left, you would see this hallway. We're going to work with the designers to use our new logo paint colors for some of those acoustic kites that you see in the ceiling. I think they'll give a nice design feature, bring some color into the place. And then we'll also use those same colors to denote the public entranceways to move people around. So you see the orange color there going into the outdoor pool. We envision using the same color for all of the patron entrances, because we have a lot of doorways in that facility, and sometimes it's hard for people to know exactly where to go. So all the places that you want to go through, you'll have one of those. We'll also be working on a new decking surface because the concrete has begun to deteriorate pretty significantly. We want to use some of that as a design feature around the edge with the edge tile giving some color. Nancy, go ahead and go through the next slide. I wasn't confident in my ability to navigate these slides myself, so I'd be better to send it to the expert. We have the slide tower is also something that needs to be either rehabilitated or replaced. And so we're not sure which will be the best course of action. When we get there, we'll get more firm costs. Okay, this is if you were down at the end of the lap lanes by the slide, where the slide dumps into the pool, looking backwards, you see on the left there, that's the entrance into the locker rooms. And you see that gray thing in the middle. Right now, that's the color they've applied to our new pool feature. Go ahead back to the other one that you had. It was that one. Okay, so see those two little things that look like the little, they're kites actually right there. So those are going to replace the arch that we have right now, and they are colored kites that have water that comes out of them. And over to the left, over by the lazy river, you can kind of hardly see a little antenna. There's a rain feature that'll be over the edge of the lazy river. It's kind of a soft water feature so that people can, as they're going around the lazy river, when that's on, it'll give them a little water interaction. The water feature on the last slide there, where you can see the gray feature with the kites above it, that one. Okay, so this is a much different feature than what we have, and actually this is the first design that we did. It's going to have a little bigger slide that will dump out into the shallow area of the pool, so that little kids don't get overwhelmed by the water, which is kind of a big deal in pools. So it'll give the little kids a little more opportunity, but it's also a bigger slide, so it won't be just limited to the little kids. And we have almost every single feature is going to have some interactive quality, so kids can control the way the water dumps into something or dam it up and then let it spill out. There's a little water bucket that will dump in. It's a small one, not like the great big one out in the outdoor pool, but there's a small one that does that. And some water jets that they can control the spin in this area. But we think this is going to be a really nice improvement. And this is the type of thing that we're looking to do with our specific purpose tax monies, is make some investments that will freshen the facility up and really add to our appeal. We know the pool is one of our real signature components at the recreation center. Nobody else has leisure pools in the community, and I think it's one of the primary reasons that families choose to visit us. We know that our seniors not all, but many of them like to swim in the laps, and the reservation system that we've implemented, we will likely retain some components of that for the lap lanes in the 8-lane pool, because that's been very popular. So some of the things that we've done during COVID, we've learned some interesting things about what people like and don't like, because we were all forced to do different things than we would have chosen normally. And I think we'll retain some of those. And then this investment and the other one that I want to mention, I don't have drawings for it yet. I want to work with the consultants to think about whether or not the components we've selected initially make the most sense. But in the grand hall that's right next to the gymnasiums, the area we used to have all of our weight equipment, and that has moved out. We think that's a really good opportunity to put some equipment that is going to appeal to multiple age groups, young and old. We found some climbing features that we think the young kids are going to like. Some of the tweens will not be able to keep their hands off of, and we think the parents will find appealing as well. So as soon as I have that, you'll be seeing that as well. But we're looking forward to some of these changes, even as we kind of try to unspool ourselves from the coronavirus. I think that is the bulk of what I wanted to share with you in terms of where we're headed. I know that the infusion of cash into the recreation center is certainly something that is concerning to all of us, and we are working really hard to try and find ways to change that. I will tell you that our adventure kids for the summer, we had revamped our pricing last year, I believe, and we were really restricted in terms of the number of kids we could host. This year, we're doubling the number of kids that we can host. We are almost full, and it brought in more than a normal month's revenue for our normal operations at the recreation center. So that makes me feel really good. It makes me have hope that, you know, once people feel comfortable, this will turn around and people will be really excited to come back to the facility, and hopefully we'll have awesome new things to offer them as well. So I think I'll leave it there, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to discuss.
Thank you for that overview, Recreation Manager. Garen, do we have questions? Councilor Gabriel, did you have one you're ready to go with?
You bet.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mayor. Jody, I'm really excited about the upgrades at the rec center. I think they're going to be outstanding just by the drawings that you presented here tonight. I'm just a little curious about the consultant that you've talked about. It sounds like you have some pretty good ideas on how to increase the numbers. Is this going to be a reinforcement from the consultant on some of your ideas, and or maybe some other ideas from that consultant on what to do to increase those numbers? A little bit of both, maybe?
Yeah, Councilor Gabriel and Mayor Weaver, I would anticipate that. It is probably a little bit of both. But even though we have some ideas that we think are good ideas, you know, this is such an unusual time. I really want to reach out and find out what other communities are experiencing and preparing for and seeing, and see what we can learn from them. This company, actually, I reached out to two companies, and they both do some analysis of operations. This particular one, this is not the way that they normally work. They are not normally just a consultant for operations. In fact, it's kind of an unusual situation that they would consider doing this. It's Barker Rinker CCAT, and they're an unusual firm in that they are typically an architecture firm, and they typically work with with recreation centers that have worked with them on the design or refurbishment standpoint. We haven't done either. I ran into them as part of a recreation training program, basically, that I went through that covered renovations. And I was thinking about the renovations that we had coming up in the future. And one of the things that really impressed me with them was they do a lot of benchmarking in terms of cost recovery, number of staff, programs, prices, and they basically look at the whole operational structure. This is not very different from the things that you do for water rates, you know, where you have a consultant that has deep experience in the field and they look at it from every angle. And so the reason that I reached out to them is because I was really impressed with the handle they had on that. They don't typically work with other community recreation centers, and if my guess is correct, they're hoping that at some point they'll get to work with us on a renovation project as well, which, you know, they do great work. I've seen their facilities and they do great work, so I would certainly consider them. The other firm that I reached out to when I initially started thinking about this was a firm that does membership analysis, and they did our original pro forma when we opened the recreation center, and they've provided us little tune-ups here and there and advice, but I didn't feel like their the way that they are structured staff-wise gives us quite the depth that this one does. One of the things that I've been impressed with is this company hires recreation people on their staff to do this type of analysis. So they hire people who do management, but also have a recreation background to do that analysis. So you kind of get a lot of interesting angles on it, but they call it their well baby checkup. It's kind of an opportunity for you to take a look at, how are you operating and what's the low hanging fruit? What things could you take advantage of with a little bit of investment? And since we're looking at this, we know the pool has to be redone. I mean, it's just, its lifespan is such that it has to be redone. Now, could we tweak it based on things they tell us? Absolutely. I would do it in a heartbeat. If they told me that there was something that was all the thing that was generating revenue and interest, absolutely, I would consider it. So a little bit of both. Councilor Gabriel.
That's great. I'm just really excited about the drawings that I'm seeing here tonight. And, after 17 years, I think it's time for a little upgrade. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Good questions. And good enthusiasm on those projects too, Councilor Gabriel, but we share it. Other questions for Jody Garrett? All right. And Jody, I thank you for that overview, and I want to just make a couple of quick comments too. I appreciate hearing about the strategies that had to be implemented pretty quickly in an extremely tough situation, like a lot of departments and like a lot of people anywhere trying to do anything over the last year. It was extremely challenging. There wasn't a really good roadmap for it. And it sounds like the rec center was able to do a good job. It was mentioned that, of course, this was, financially disruptive to the operations. That was anticipated. I think most of the council anticipated that we would have to be making some unique adjustments and employ some unique strategies to deal with that impact over the last year. We understand that, but I think we also understand that the rec center is something that people in Laramie really value and think is a very important amenity and is worth the investments that we need to make in it. And just lastly, I would want to say too, I appreciate your comments about sort of the reemerging into a more normal environment, and how that's going to need to happen gradually for lots of reasons. And one of them is just to make sure that people feel like their safety is prioritized and we're not doing anything too quickly. And it'll take a little bit of time before we get back to what we might consider regular business, but it'll happen gradually and steadily and probably fairly quickly, maybe faster than some of us might fear. So I really appreciate that entire overview of all of that. And like everybody else, it's great to see those schematics and mock-ups for the pool improvements. That looks pretty cool. Can't wait to see more of it. Any other council? Vice Mayor Pierce, please.
Yeah, thank you. I guess my question will be for Jody, or maybe Todd or Janine. Jody, it seems like you've got a couple ideas going on in terms of different projects and different consulting firms or opportunities to work with different consulting firms. Do you think you've grasped the full scope of what could possibly be added to or adapted, to kind of meet future trends? And a slightly more picky question would be, did we go out for bid on these different scopes, or just give me a little more background on that process, if you would, please.
Sure. And I may forget parts of what you asked, so if I do, feel free to nudge me again. In terms of the process that I used with the requests for these folks, I initially started with a request just about membership fees and an analysis of membership fees, and I got that back from the first firm. But I did it verbally with them as opposed to a written solicitation, because really what I was looking for at the time was what I thought was just going to be an overview of our membership rates. And typically, there's not a lot of firms that do that. And so I reached out to the firms that I know of that do that with that specific request. As we got to going, and you know, your discussion about like the planning, I'll back up just a little bit and say, when we were back preparing to go out for the specific purpose tax, I had conceptual plans in place for what we were going to do. We have still stuck to those, although they have been adapted to address pandemic conditions. And I think the pandemic made us aware that some of the way we want to implement those improvements ought to be adjusted a little bit, even for the long haul. They're not short-term changes. It's probably not healthy for people to be packed into a small area with, you know, not enough space to, you know, even have a private conversation. It's a little too close to quarters during even flu season. And so we think some of the changes that we're making, both in the Grand Hall and in the administrative area, you know, we'll address those things. But longer term, the pool was on the radar. The family-friendly area is the one area that popped up kind of as a result of what we're doing. And so the planning for that is the shortest of all of them, which is why I really would like to get somebody's assistance with it. And it was a result of taking over that area for the administrative functions to space us out a little better. And so removing the playground means I need to find something for the kids to do in that facility that is specific for them. And that's what we're trying to work on, is something that the kids are going to feel like is their spot, but the parents are going to find engaging as well, because we need them to be there supervising. It's not just a little tiny kid's spot being right next to the gym. So in terms of the city procedures, the amount of dollars that we're talking about for either one of these firms is well within the scope of what we would normally do without having to go out for a full bidding process. And so, you know, we've all discussed with, when I say we all, Janine and Todd and I have all met with them and had discussions and looked at what we really need. And I think the one thing that we all are in agreement of is that it would be good to have an outside set of eyes to look at what we're doing to make sure that whether it's new plans, whether it's old plans, they're all in line with what's going to make us sustainable from a revenue standpoint. Some of the changes that we're looking at doing with our memberships and with our website are really to focus more on a customer-centric approach. You know, what services do they want? What benefits do they want? And how do we entice them with our offerings as opposed to restrict them? You know, well, you can't get this by doing, you know, something. So like, for instance, on our website right now, it's a little cumbersome, and we aren't doing a print program anymore. Partly because we just couldn't keep up with all the changes. But we need to revamp our website to adapt to that condition so that people can find our programs easily. We're looking to integrate an app that will enable a person to sign up for push notifications on certain things. If you want a reminder for fitness classes, or maybe you want to reserve a lane in the pool, it would enable us to do some things like that. The combination of those things, I feel like, is a little too vast to just say, oh, I know it all. I know Laramie. I can do this on my own. I think it would be wise to have somebody with a broader scope. This company works all over the country and is going to have kind of that outside trend look at what's going on in the country as well as in our area.
Thanks, Jody. I think you did cover it. I guess, and I agree. I think sometimes that outside perspective is highly, highly valuable, and it kind of keeps us in line with upcoming trends, which I think are so important. I guess part of my thinking on this is you know, we are to some extent, you know, a recreation destination, obviously more in the outdoor sense, and I feel like there's got to be some programming that could potentially be really unique, you know, to potentially prepare for for those outside activities as well. So I hope whomever you're talking with has maybe seen and is, you know, familiar with that aspect as well. So thank you.
You're welcome. For what it's worth, I agree wholeheartedly.
Okay. Yep. I appreciate that answer to that question. Sounds like the Vice Mayor received all the information that she needed there. I think it goes without saying that we want the rec center to be efficient and competitive and control costs and maximize value for people. And I know you're always working to do that. And part of that might be bringing in those third-party perspectives. We appreciate it. Any other questions on this or in this general area or about anything that you heard about the rec center, council members? Don't see any hands coming up, so I guess we'll say thank you for that. And we will go to the next part.
Council, this is, Mayor, this is our last thing we had on our agenda to cover tonight. I was hoping we'd be done by 8:30, so clearly we're over time. I'll just conclude with a couple quick comments, and then I think we'll be done for the evening. On page 80, I do want to point out for the council that, and I point this out only because I think in the whole time I've been with the city, this is maybe the only time that I can remember that we've had to make this statement to you all. But as you know, we do have a 3 to 6 month reserve policy. And on page 80, you'll see that we have maintained our 3 to 6 months reserve in the Recreation Center Fund for years, except in 2020, which of course you are understanding, you know, all of the factors and given the conversation we've had over the last half hour. But I do feel, you know, that it's important that we point that out because that's a significant departure from where we would like to be, and we are certainly outside of our policy for reserve. But have a plan to correct that. I also will say the American Recovery Plan does allow for revenue replacement. Malia and I were talking while Jody and Todd were making their presentation. We'll be reviewing revenue replacement across the city, and the rec center is a place where we will look at that as well and determine if that's something that we would look at American Recovery Plan for. So just a quick FYI there. With that, I would just scroll down to the expenditure section. A note for you, given everything you've heard, it will not be a surprise for me to tell you that I'm really recommending no change in expenditures in the Recreation Center Fund. Page 84 and 85 show you we have one minor one-time $1,000 modification I'm recommending, and then in the centrally budgeted kind of overhead cost of doing business category, we do have a maintenance agreement that is going up slightly for $1,500. So that's kind of the Recreation Center, not in a nutshell, but in a big nutshell, I guess, and that concludes our agenda for this evening.
Okay, so that takes us out of the work session on the operating budget. Council, I think
Mr. Mayor, do you see that Malia has her hand up? I
did not. Thank you. Go ahead.
Mayor and Council, I just wanted to remind you that we'll be sending out amendment forms for the operating tomorrow. And, you know, if there's anything, you know, we went over most of the general fund. If there's anything that you all would like to have amendments on, those are going to be due the 17th at noon, which is Monday. If you need help with any amendments, please call Jennifer Wade or myself. I'll be happy to help write the amendment. But one of the things we have to, if there have amendments, we usually try to get them out to council so everyone can look at the amendments. Sometimes you have counselors who have the same amendments. We try to write them for that. And we'll be going over the amendments on the 19th and to make our deadline. So I just wanted to make that announcement. Thank you.
You bet. No, that's what we need a constant reminder of. Council members, you heard it. So appreciate that. And I'm sorry I didn't see you earlier, Malia. I was already moving on to the next part of the agenda there. So folks, we need to do a quick agenda review. And then if there's any updates or comments, and then we can close this work session. Updates or comments? Okay. Councilor Gabriel, then I'll go to the Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Real briefly here, I know we're getting a little bit late here tonight. Helped the county clerk at the Laramie Leadership Conference last Wednesday at the Railroad Depot. It was their last event of the year. Nancy and I answered questions and informed Laramie leadership members on the various boards and commissions that are available to the citizens. Very productive. A lot of people went through in a 2-hour period. Yesterday, I watched over 2 hours of discussion by the county commissioners on the Aquifer Protection Overlay Zone. That was forwarded to them by the Albany County Planning and Zoning Commission. Not many changes were proposed by the commission, but it was pointed out by the acting county attorney that any changes to APAWS would necessitate a remand back to the Planning and Zoning Commission before the county commissioners could actually approve the amendments to APAWS. So I think the key word is substantial changes, and there were many substantial changes made by the commissioners. It was just a work session anyway. So anyway, that was yesterday, a couple of hours, and then tomorrow night, Parks and Rec Board will be meeting, and I guess I have a conflict, so we'll see what happens tomorrow night. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Gabriel. Let us know what you find out either way. Vice Mayor, thanks for waiting.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. Councilor Somerville, wondering if you want to update really quickly on our meeting yesterday with Commissioner Gosar. Was that yesterday?
It was. Yeah,
okay.
Sure. So the Intergovernmental Committee, aka the Squishy Committee, met yesterday. And we talked a little bit about the MOU for the detention center. That's kind of in the county's ballpark, waiting for an update to see where that's sitting at the county attorney's office, realizing that may be a little while till we get an answer with what's going on over there. We also, Chief Johnson was kind enough to join us, and the chief and Janine gave a great update to Commissioner Gosar on EMS, ambulance costs, fire costs, and there was a lot of discussion held around that in terms of the county possibly participating in the future to help support the EMS calls that are outside of the city boundaries. I think that'll be a little bit of a longer conversation, but we were able to kind of start that yesterday. And then we had an additional conversation that we put on our list for our next meeting, and it was kind of proposed by the commission, was to discuss maybe using some of our ARPA funds together for a joint project. And so we put that on the list to talk about in 2 weeks, realizing that the guidance from the Treasury just came out yesterday, I believe. So everybody will start taking a look at that. Vice Mayor, did I miss anything on that list?
No, you didn't. I appreciate you joining there.
Yep.
Yeah, so that was it. Just wanted to share that information. I think, in terms of funding and, revenue recovery, I think we've got some good possibilities on the horizon with some of those funds. So I hope I hope it won't be subtracted in other areas. So I hope it all works out well.
Yeah, here, and I know we have future meetings and work sessions planned around exactly that, and we're going to get some more information. I tried to take a look at some of that Treasury guidance, and it seemed to me like it was nearly as ambiguous as the previous information that they'd released, but I know people will take a look at it, and we'll learn more as we go. Any other updates from council members or comments? Councilmember Cumby. And then I'll go back to you, Councilor Gabriel.
Yes, I have 2 updates. One is the Disabilities Commission met on Thursday, and we will be joining with the Pride Fest group to have representation at Pride Fest at Washington Park. And we have decided to reestablish the Disability Interactive Awareness Activity, aka the obstacle course. And so we will be doing that on the basketball court at the Washington Park during Pride Fest. So that's an exciting way for us to get out to the community and more interactive. Secondly, Board of Health. Councilor Pierce and I interviewed Dr. Mike Comley, and we have submitted recommendation for him to come onto the board as the physician. I think he has a lot of great experience from the community to offer us. So he will be up for appointment on May the 18th, and then the board will have our first meeting of the year on 5/20. So we'll be up and running again. And at that time, we're going to review the bylaws and also begin a discussion to explore the current functions of the Board of Health, and also to begin to look at the scope and other ways that we might contribute to the city. And that's that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Cumby. And I assume that Assistant City Manager Fieser knows about your plans for the obstacle course at Washington Park.
Oops, I'll make sure that he does.
That sounds like something we want to throw him on the loop.
Thank you. I appreciate your guidance and direction. I'll do that.
Those are good updates. I really appreciate it. And for everybody that was involved in twisting Dr. Comley's arm to help us out on the Board of Health, thank you. Do not let go. Do not let go.
And I do want to, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I do want to say thank you to Councilwoman Stalder for encouraging Dr. Comley, and he believes that his arm will heal soon, Jessica.
Yeah, you just have to bribe him with cookies, then you're good to go.
He told me you took him to lunch, too.
Yeah, and by the way, we all got the apple a day message from him. So in case anybody's wondering, an apple a day is still a good thing.
Whatever it takes. I think that's a real achievement to get somebody like Dr. Conley to serve on our Board of Health. So thank you all very, very much. Councilor Gabriel, thank you for waiting.
Mayor, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but on the translation of our meeting here tonight, Jody's name kept coming up as God.
Oh, well.
Did anybody else notice that? I was just wondering where that came from.
I didn't see that, but in some sense, she does have that elevation as far as the recreation center operations go. But yeah,
I guess so.
But no, we regret the error and technical difficulty. I didn't see that. Other updates, council members, anybody? I know it's late, but now's your chance. Councilor Stalder.
Thank you. My update for the airport board is we have a new director at the Laramie Airport, and that's Amy Terrell. She's going to be fantastic. And then just a quick comment from tonight. I have so much appreciation for all the departments that have pivoted or pirouetted or whatever you want to say. I think there's some silver linings with COVID at the rec center specifically. I think curbside kid pickup is like the best thing to ever happen. So I think there's some opportunities, and I just really enjoyed listening to everybody tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Stalder. I completely agree with those comments, as I bet we all do. Yeah, it's good to get this this budget session happening, because we get to have all that check-in and those overviews and reminders about the different departments, and then this year especially, because you just start to imagine and think about the things that they were doing over the course of the last year while we were doing what we were doing. So it's pretty impressive, and it definitely increases my feelings of appreciation for all the people we have working across all the departments in the city of Laramie. Really, and it's kind of good to have that reminder. Anybody else? Any comments other than those we've already made? I think we're all kind of on the same page there, and then we made some of them throughout the course of the work session too, which is appropriate. Okay, well, why don't we just take a quick look at the agenda, and if you have any questions, bring them up now, and once we get through that, we'll close it up. And of course, I'm now remembering that I've forgotten to ask for public comment, so I will check in about that. But I don't see attendees for public comment. I see Assistant Chief Terry in there, but he's not raising his hand for comments. So I don't think we have any, and the city clerk had told me earlier that we didn't have anyone that had emailed me earlier to let me know that we didn't have anybody that had signed up ahead of time. So I think we're all right on public comments, Council. Any questions or comments about the agenda? We have the appointment to the Board of Health that we received the updates about on the consent agenda. But for those of you that can, please express that council-wide appreciation for Dr. Conley's willingness to do that for us. And we'll have some fairly I think easily anticipated items of discussion on this agenda, but I think they're spaced out pretty well with other items that may not take up as much time. And then we do have an executive session, so we'll want to go at a fairly good pace. But we did that the prior week, and I don't see any reason why we won't be able to do that this next week.
Mayor?
Yeah.
I have a quick question. It's for the city clerk. So item 16 is the changes to the alcohol beverages code, I'm assuming related to the state statute changes. Are those pretty extensive?
Mayor and council, there are a lot of changes. We've done a PowerPoint presentation to try to sum up what the changes are. And we'll have that included in our packet that'll be published with the agenda.
I appreciate that. And just to clarify, these are changes we really don't have any choice about, right? They're governed by state statutes, so we have to update our code, correct?
Yeah, there are a few minor changes that we've recommended in accordance with the changes from House Bill 13 and House Bill 156.
Okay.
But they are small in detail.
Perfect. Thank you, City Clerk.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Mayor, just a comment.
Yep.
I happened to be passing President Seidel the other day on the sidewalk and alerted him to number 18 on the agenda. He was not aware of the Planning Commission's denial of the parking garage. And I said that you might want to attend that meeting. And he said that he would look into it and he appreciated the information. That's it.
Thank you, Councilor Gabriel. That's going to be an interesting discussion. Other comments? I see a lot of head shaking. I see tired, blinky eyes that would like to see us close this work session. So without any other input on the agenda, I think we should close the work session. There was no public comment. I want to thank everybody for hanging in there, asking good questions, all the staff for the presentations and budget overviews. We'll say good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you all.